Please be seated. What's coming out? I just assumed she was out here. All right, we're back on the record to begin the afternoon. The appearances are the same, but for Ms. Petras, do we need to wait for her?
She'll be back shortly.
Okay. Is there anything we need to bring up, to put on the record before we bring the jury in?
I don't think so.
Mr. Cotton?
No.
Okay.
Radloff.
Please stand for the jury. Please be seated. Is the state prepared to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you for being so prompt, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get going again then right away.
We will call Randy Radloff.
If you'd please come up to the witness stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Officer Randy L.N. Radloff, R-A-D-L-O-F-F.
Thank you. You may be seated. Once you're seated, if you would like to swap out your mask for a face shield, there's face shields. Oh, you have one in front of you. Thank you. And then I'll just remind you that the black box, that's the microphone. Thank you. If you'd try to allow your voice to project to that. Thank you. Go ahead.
Officer Radloff, can you state for the record where you are employed?
The Hobart Lawrence Police Department
How long have you been with the Hobart Lawrence Police Department?
since 2012.
And what is your current position with Hobart Lawrence?
Patrol officer.
Were you working as a Hobart Lawrence police officer on the evening of June 7th of 2016?
Yes, I was.
And shortly after 8 p.m., were you part of a call to 1368 Riverdale Drive in the village of Hobart?
Yes.
That's in Brown County, Wisconsin.
Yes, it is.
And what was the nature of the call that you were responding to at that time?
It came out as a weapons call where people were possibly being stabbed at the residence.
And when you arrived on scene, were there any other officers present at that time?
When I arrived on scene, I think I was number 3, so Deputy Dernbach and Officer Webster were on scene when I got on scene.
Rachel, could I have the board? Officer Radloff, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1D1.
And I'll just go ahead.
Could you identify that photograph? And again, there's a board over here in front of the council table, if that's easier.
Yes, that's the 16, or that's the residence where Dispatch 2.
Okay, is that an overview of 1368?
Yes.
And based on your experience at the residence on that date, are you familiar with this area?
Yes, I am.
I'm also going to give you a laser pointer just to assist you in case you need to point to a specific area. Officer Radloff, when you arrived on scene, where did you park your squad?
When I arrived on scene, I parked on Riverdale, probably down over here if this is continued.
So just for the record, the area where you parked your squad is just off of the photograph on the bottom and a little bit to the left of center. Is that fair?
Correct.
And you said Officer Dernbach and Officer Webster were already on scene?
Yes, they were.
Okay, what did you do after meeting with those officers?
After we met with them, we walked up this tree line right here. It's all pine trees. We met like right here, and we proceeded to the residence.
So you're pointing to the tree line to the left of the driveway?
Correct.
And you're indicating by the laser pointer that you walked up the left side of that tree line, is that right?
Correct.
All three of you walked up together to make the approach?
Yes.
As you were walking up the tree line, did you observe anything?
About halfway up the tree line, there was a bike that was tipped over. We saw it, we made note of it, and then we kept going past it.
Officer Radloff, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1D3. Could you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
That would be the bike that we saw.
And at that point in time, are you, where is that bike with respect to the tree line that we observed on the previous photo?
It would have been on the west side of the tree line or the left side of the tree line.
The bike as it's positioned in this photograph, do you believe that's roughly consistent with what you observed that day?
When we first walked past it was just tipped over on the grass. You could see it was like, it bent down the grass, so it was placed there recently.
As you went past that tree line, did you make an approach to the residence itself?
I kept going up the tree line all the way to the back of the residence to cover the back of the house.
Okay. So I'm going to bring you back to the first photograph here, which is 1D1. Can you point with the laser pointer to the location near the residence where you were asked to stand by?
I was covering right around this area, still behind the trees, but I could see the back of the house.
All right. And what was your purpose in going to that location?
To cover the back of the house.
All right. And what was your understanding of what the other officers were going to do?
They were going to go around the front and make contact with anybody inside.
When officers initially made contact, did you enter the residence at that point in time?
Not when they initially made contact.
Right. When you were covering the back of the residence, were you able to make any observations about the residence itself?
There was a window approximately right here, basement window that looked like it was popped open about 2 inches.
All right, and you were pointing to with the laser pointer to the left side of the house, very on the side, but very near the rear of the residence. Is that correct?
Correct. It was right around there.
I'm going to direct your attention to Exhibit 1D4. What is depicted in that photograph?
That would be the west side of the house where that basement window was.
This photo, from the angle that it's taken, how close of an angle to that is where you were standing?
From there, probably 5 feet, 10 feet back further. So
this is very close to where you would have
Correct.
been observing?
Correct.
And you were able to see that window was open at that time?
Yes.
So the window as it's depicted here was consistent with what you observed?
Yes.
And that is at the time before officers made entrance into the residence?
Correct.
I'm showing photograph 1D5. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
That's that basement window again.
Just from a different angle?
Correct.
And 1D6?
Same thing, basement window.
Again, is that all, both 5 and 6, were those both consistent with what you had observed that evening?
Yes.
All right. After you've gone to the back of the residence and officers make the approach, what do you do at that point?
Once the other officers went around the front, I maintained the rear security perimeter to make sure no one ran out of the back of the house. Once the word was given that the house was clear, I then went to the front of the house and met with Deputy Dernbach.
And you're aware that Deputy Dernbach at some point made a perimeter search using his canine?
Correct, yes.
Were you part of the perimeter search or the team that supported him?
No, I wasn't. After the house was secured, since I was a primary officer on scene, I maintained that house as a crime scene and started a crime scene log.
All right. So you were not part of the team that took Mr. Cayer into custody, is that correct?
No, I wasn't.
Were you able to hear or observe what was happening when he was placed under arrest?
I was standing on the driveway at the time, and I heard a bunch of yelling toward the northwest. About 6 or 8 officers went running that direction, and that's about all I heard of that.
Okay. And at that point, you were still maintaining the crime scene log down by your squad vehicle, or where were you located?
At that time, I was probably right around here on the driveway.
At some point in time later, did you make entry into the residence?
Yes.
And how did that come about?
To familiarize with the crime scene, I initially went in with Deputy Dernbach. He showed me where the mother was lying in the bathtub. At that time, the water in the shower and the sink faucet was still on. And then we walked back out. I made my phone calls to my supervisors, and we went from there.
So you noted that the water was on in both the shower and in the faucet?
Correct.
All right. Did you do anything about that?
Not at that time.
At some point later, did you?
Yes. After my chief arrived on scene, we contacted DCI, and we decided to turn the water off at that time to preserve evidence.
In addition to going in the residence and making the observation of one of the deceased in the bathroom, did you make any other observations of the residence?
The house was very, I call it bloody. There's blood everywhere. And then there's two dogs that were still in the residence too.
What did you do with the dogs?
We contacted our animal control, who brought crates, and we were able to get the dogs out of the residence and into safekeeping.
Did you make any contact with Sabrina's body on site?
A little bit later, we walked around to the back through the woods here, and I just viewed her, and then I walked back to the driveway.
And what was the purpose of doing your walk over to that area of the scene?
Just crime scene familiarization.
Were you able to make any observations of Sabrina's body as she was sitting there?
She was covered up with a sheet at that time.
And did you speak with other officers about the crime scene just to familiarize yourself?
Yes.
All right, I have no further questions at this time.
When you showed up at the house, there was nobody running from the home, right?
Not that we saw.
You didn't see Mr. Cayer run from the home.
No, I did not.
And in fact, you never saw Mr. Cayer at all, those other officers that saw him.
Correct.
So it'd be fair to say he was never, with your observation, he wasn't seen running anywhere around that area, right?
I did not personally see him, no.
And Sabrina, you did see she was over on the side that you identified, right?
Correct.
But by the time you arrived, you hadn't seen her run either?
Negative.
Okay. And there's 2 other officers that arrived on scene before you. That was your testimony?
Correct.
Deputies or officers, right?
Yes.
And then your job was basically just to maintain a crime scene log, effectively?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. You put the face shield in the box behind you. Use face shield. Thank you.
Your Honor, if I could just have a moment, I need to confirm witnesses who are available.
All right, thank you.
Next few witness order, if I could. We're at Webster, right? Just body cam. Yeah. But that's possible today, even. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Sounds good.
State will call Deputy Raska.
Will you please come up to the witness stand?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Deputy Justin Raska, R-A-S-K-A.
Thank you. You can remove your mask and replace it with the face shield. Thank you. And then if you could, like you're doing, scooch forward so that your voice will project into the microphone. Thank you.
Deputy Raska, can you state for the record how you are employed?
I'm a patrol deputy with the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been with the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
About 8.5 years.
And were you working in your capacity as a sheriff's deputy on June 7th, 2016 at approximately 8 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall being dispatched to a scene at 1368 Riverdale Drive in the village of Hobart?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what you were doing prior to that call?
Actually, I know exactly what I was doing prior to that call. I was on an accident on the intersection of Lineville Road and Velp Avenue in the village of Swamico.
And once you heard this dispatch, what did you do?
I actually had just finished up that call. I was clearing that call yet, and I responded directly to this call.
When you responded to this scene, were there other officers or deputies on scene?
I responded immediately when it was dispatched out. I don't think anybody was on scene immediately, but there were people on scene prior to my arrival.
Okay. Who was on scene when you got there?
Officer Radloff with Hobart Lawrence PD, K-9 Deputy Brad Dernbach with Brown County Sheriff's Office, and right before me, Deputy Miller, Eric Miller with Brown County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. Do you know if there was an Oneida PD officer there when you arrived yet, or no?
I don't know if he was there yet, no.
Okay. Deputy Raska, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 1F1. Can you describe that photograph?
Yes, kind of in the center of the photograph is the residence 1368 that we responded to. County J or Riverdale Drive, kind of at the lower corner of that address.
Can you indicate when you arrived on scene where you parked your squad?
I believe it was somewhere in this general area down here.
Okay, so there's a driveway that's kind of right in the middle of the photograph. It's a long driveway that leads up to the residence that you indicated is 1368. Immediately to the right of that, there's a second driveway. So in relation to that driveway, where did you park your squad car, the second driveway?
Right there. I believe this is 1378 Riverdale. My squad car would have been parked right there alongside the road.
After you arrived, where did you go?
I met with Eric Miller. I believe we met with Deputy Dernbach and Randy Radloff. Somewhere in the area right down here, kind of in front of the address. And then I stayed with Eric Miller on my approach to the house.
Okay, and from which direction did you and Deputy Miller approach the house?
Deputy Miller and I approached kind of along this tree line. There's kind of like a hedge or shrub tree line along here. Deputy Miller and I approached kind of in between the tree line and this neighboring house, 1378.
And it was just the two of you who made that approach?
Correct.
And for the record, that was the driveway to 1368 is right in the middle. There's a tree line just to the right of that driveway, and you approached to the right of that tree line. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1F2. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
This is the residence of 1368 right here. Residence of 1378 right here. Riverdale Drive or County J. John. This would have been, I believe it was probably this path right through here that Deputy Miller and I approached 1368.
Okay, so just indicating with the laser pointer, again, just to the right of the tree line, right of the driveway. Upon your approach to that residence, what did you observe?
This is probably about how far away we were at the time. We had, Deputy Miller and I were approaching the residence. We had observed a female body laying face down in the grass behind 1378.
So I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 1F3. What is depicted in that photograph?
This is believed to be the female victim that we had located as we were making our approach. This is that hedge line that I had talked about that you could see on the, I believe that would have been number 1.
So using your laser pointer, that the left part of this screen, there's a hedge line or a tree line, and you indicated that you had talked about that as separating 1378 from 1368 on the previous slide, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you indicated that at about the angle depicted in this photograph is about the time that you observed the female?
Correct.
And when you observed her, can you describe what you saw?
Saw a female that was laying face down in the grass. Immediately began giving commands to that female, not knowing what her involvement in the situation was whatsoever. Gave commands to the female and received no response whatsoever. Deputy Miller and I then approached the female, and I observed her again laying face down in the grass. I could see that she had wounds on her back that were indicative of what probably would have been stab wounds.
When you made that observation of the female lying there, did you see any other parties around?
No.
And you're with Deputy Miller at that point?
Correct.
Did the two of you both approach her together?
Correct.
And what do you do with her body at that time?
I believe I checked for a pulse initially while she was still laying face down on the grass. I did feel what I thought was a pulse, so I rolled the female victim over onto her back then, so her chest was exposed to me. I again observed a couple wounds that were indicative of what I believe to be stab wounds, and I felt for not only a carotid pulse but also a radial pulse on her wrist as well, attempting to observe any signs of life.
In addition to feeling for a pulse, did you attempt any life-saving measures yourself?
I did. I began CPR when I could no longer feel a pulse.
At some point in time, did rescue arrive on scene to take over for you?
Yeah, rescue arrived on scene along with a couple other officers or deputies from different agencies, and they took over the life-saving portion of the female victim while I continued to kind of search the area after that.
Okay. After rescue came and took over for you, what was the next thing that you did?
I met up then, I believe it was with Deputy Famry, who was on scene, or it could have been Oneida Officer Logan Webster, actually. There were a couple outbuildings that were behind 1378, including...
Bring you back to Exhibit 1F1 to allow you to show where the outbuildings are.
Yeah, there's a garage, and I believe, I don't know if this is a shed or what else was back there, but there were a couple outbuildings behind 1378. Obviously, being in the immediate area of where one of these victims were laying, we wanted to search the area to make sure that the suspect was not actively in one of those buildings.
Okay. When you were searching the outbuildings behind the residence that you'd indicated as 1378, did you notice any parties on scene at that time?
No.
After searching or clearing those outbuildings, what did you do next?
I met up with Deputy Famry, kind of in the driveway of 1368, kind of in this area right here, right on the corner.
That's the area still kind of blocked by the tree, but just in front of what, the garage of 1368?
Correct. We had then checked this garage as well. I believe this is the garage for 1368, one of the detached garages for 1368.
Okay.
So Deputy Famry and I then checked that garage, and we weren't able to locate anybody inside that garage as well.
That's the garage to the right of the residence on this photograph?
Correct.
All right. After doing that, what was the next thing that you did?
We waited around briefly in front of the address, kind of in that driveway area again, for Lieutenant McCulley and K-9 Deputy Dernbach. Deputy Dernbach had decided that at that point he wanted to attempt a track for the suspect using his partner Pal, his K-9 partner Pal. So I had met with him, and him and I kind of went off on me covering him, me following him, and we conducted a track kind of around the yard of 1368.
Were you aware at that time when you started the track if the complaining witness had exited the residence at that time?
No, I wasn't aware of that at that time, no.
Okay. That was not part of your responsibility?
No.
I want to bring you back to 1F3. Did you make any observations of the area around the body of the female?
No, I didn't.
All right. Back on 1F1, if you could use the laser pointer to depict the area where you believe Deputy Dernbach was when you started the track.
Do you mind if I go back to that last question? I was thinking of the environment immediately around her. I do recall that there was blood in the grass around her body. I don't know if that was part of an answer to the question you were looking for, but specifically when I would kneel next to her to perform CPR, there was blood on the ground next to her in the grass.
Did you note any direction or any direction of travel or anything of that nature?
Not that I recall. No, it was kind of pooling around her.
Thank you. All right, back to 1F1, if you could note on there the area where you began the track with Deputy Dernbach.
Yes, sir. So we started in a counterclockwise manner. We kind of, again, you would have to refer to him and how he works his partner, but we kind of moved in this direction around the yard, along the tree line, him looking for whatever reaction he would look for with his canine partner, and I was essentially his cover officer. His primary responsibility was that dog and finding that track, and I wanted to make sure that he was safe.
At some point in time, did Deputy Dernbach indicate to you that his dog had sort of developed a track or a scent?
Yes, sir.
And do you know about where that location was when the dog started a specific track?
It would have been in this back corner. I don't know exactly where we went into the tree line, but essentially we stopped. We went into the tree line a few feet, maybe 5 feet, and stopped, and Officer Dernbach then asked for more units because he made it appear as though his dog was indicating on something in that tree line.
Okay. And did other units arrive for support?
Yeah. Deputy Miller then arrived back at our location along with Officer Logan Webster.
And once those two cover officers arrived along with yourself and Deputy Dernbach, what did you do?
We continued on to this wooded line, I was at Deputy Dernbach's rear, so again, providing safety cover for him, who was obviously had the responsibility of following his dog. We went into the wood line a little bit, and Deputy Dernbach indicated that his dog was hitting heavy on a specific area inside the wood line.
Can you describe the vegetation in there?
Thick, dark. I remember, I think I took my flashlight even out at some points because it was dark in that area. Considerably darker than standing out in the yard. If I remember right, it wasn't like grown up vegetation. There weren't very large trees, but it was thick cover in there.
And do you recall about what time it was when you started to make that track?
I don't remember the exact time frame. It wouldn't have been probably around the 8:30 time. It wasn't too much longer after we had arrived on scene. CPR was given to the female victim, and then we met up with Officer Deputy Dernbach. It shouldn't have been too much longer after that point.
And once the track was initiated, did the dog locate a subject fairly quickly?
Yeah. Yes.
And you know on that overhead roughly where the subject was located?
I believe it was going to be back in this corner right here. I remember there was a kind of a small clearing area with tall grass or weeds that the male suspect was laying down in, and that's where the dog had indicated, and that's kind of where Deputy Dernbach was giving his commands to.
Before we get to that, I just want to come back and cover this. This is 1F4. Can you indicate what's depicted in photograph 1F4?
This would be the female victim that Deputy Miller and I came upon initially. This is that hedge tree line that we had walked up alongside. 1368, the address of 1368 is going to be directly through this tree line behind this yard.
So when you're pointing, there's a large tree that's depicted near the top, kind of in the center of that photograph, and then you indicated with your pointer just to the right of that tree, there's sort of a small clearing in that tree line, and 1368 is directly through that little clearing.
Correct.
The angle that we're taking, where this photo is taken from, what is at that location?
That's kind of the back of the house of 1378. The garage of 1378 would be on your right if you're looking from the point of view of the camera. And the house is going to be directly behind you.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1F5. Can you indicate what's depicted in this photograph?
This is going to be the back of the residence of 1368. This is the tree line. This is the counterclockwise motion that Deputy Dernbach and I had taken along this tree line. And this general area is going to be kind of where we went into the woods. I don't know if it was back here further or if it was right at this clearing, but this general area is where we entered the wood line at the back of the house.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1F6. Does this photograph have any significance to you?
This is going to be that kind of tall grass, weedy area that I had described, kind of in a clearing from where the male suspect was located. So this is the tree line that we came through on the right-hand side of that photo that we had come through as Pal had indicated on the male suspect.
And do you know if he was in the more heavily wooded area or in the clearing area when you located him?
I believe he was laying down in the tall grassy area, probably in the clearing next to the wooded area.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1F7. What's depicted in this photograph?
This is the location where the male was located. He was laying down in that grassy, brushy area there that Canine Pal had indicated on.
And can you describe the process then after you kind of discovered the male? Who makes contact with him first?
Yeah, so Deputy Dernbach was giving out commands to the male. He's at that point in time, he has to determine whether he's going to let his dog engage that suspect. Canine Pal did engage the suspect, and then Deputy Miller and I came up, and one of us I believe Deputy Miller took his left arm, I took his right wrist. We got on each side of the suspect. First and foremost, we wanted to make sure that he didn't have any weapons on him. He wasn't complying at first, and then we were able to see that his hands were empty. That's when we went hands-on with him, and we were able to secure one arm. I secured the other, and we were able to put handcuffs on him.
So you believe you and Deputy Miller are the two people that put him in handcuffs?
Yes.
You indicated that he wasn't complying immediately. Was it a relatively short period of time where there was struggle, or how did that go down?
Yeah, when Deputy Dernbach had initially given him commands, it was show me your hands, indicated that he probably saw him in the grass, show me your hands. There was no compliance there. He wasn't indicating that, he wasn't giving up to law enforcement. He wasn't showing us his hands or showing that he was there. So that was the time of non-compliance. Past that, then when K-9 PAL engaged with the suspect, then we were able to see that his hands were empty, and we were able to go hands-on with him and no longer had our weapons out at that point.
Okay. Were you able to make any specific observations of the male's person after you went hands-on with him?
Yeah, I remember he had damage to, he was wearing blue jeans. He had damage to his blue jeans as far as where the canine would have engaged. I believe that would have been on his left thigh, kind of hip area. And there was a lot of blood. There was a lot of blood not only where the canine had engaged, but I remember his pants being full of blood as well. He had a bandage around one of his hands. I want to say it was his right hand. And then he was wearing some sort of bandana face mask kind of hanging around his neck.
Was it covering or concealing his face at that point in time?
No, I don't believe so.
Do you recall if any of the officers, or specifically you yourself, did you observe Mr. Cayer before the dog engaged with him?
I could see that there was something or someone in the grass. I wasn't able to make any observations or identify somebody specifically in the grass, especially where the canine had indicated. The canine doesn't indicate for that general area. He was very specific, and there was somebody laying right there in the grass.
All right. After the handcuffs were placed on Mr. Cayer, where did you go with him?
We had assisted him up off the ground. We had then walked him, the previous photo. We had walked him out into this clearing area right here.
This is Exhibit 1F6.
Just on this side of the tall grass or weedy area. I was on one arm. I believe I was on his right side. I believe it was Deputy Miller that would have been on his left side then. And we kind of, his hands being behind his back, we were able to kind of carry him underneath his arms, underneath his shoulders, and carry him to that area. He was upright, but he wasn't exactly walking on his own power at that point.
All right. And what happened when you got out into that clearing?
Looked him over for injuries, asked him if he needed rescue, if he had injuries. I don't remember any straightforward responses. I think there was some incoherent mumbling that came from him. But there were no obvious signs of injury other than that left thigh hip area that PAL had engaged him on.
Were you involved in then any search or processing of Mr. Cayer at that scene?
No, I had actually turned him over. There were Green Bay PD officers that were arriving on scene. I believe there were Green Bay PD officers that arrived on scene that had we kind of handed him off, the suspect over to the officers at the time, just because for me personally, it was something that I had just been involved in finding him, and it was that high stress situation where we hand him off to another officer and they can perform the search and follow up that's needed.
Did you have an opportunity to observe the suspect's face?
I remember his face being almost like he got in a fight. I think he had like a fat lip or bruising around his mouth. He had long blonde hair, kind of disheveled, kind of like he had been hiding in the woods. Didn't appear as though he had just cleaned up and had walked out of the house.
After handing him off to the Green Bay police officers, do you have any further involvement at that point?
Not in that case, no.
Deputy Reska, do you know about what time you were dispatched? Do you have any information on that?
I was dispatched at about 8:13 p.m. I believe I arrived around 8:19 p.m. So about 6-minute response time from that previous location that I was at before I got to the residence.
All right. Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton?
Good afternoon, sir. You were present when Mr. Cayer was found in the tall grass there on that picture, right?
Correct.
Do you know how he got to that tall grass?
I do not.
Do you know whether he walked there under his own power or whether somebody else brought him there?
I do not.
You never saw him go there, would be fair to say.
Correct.
And you talked about, I think you used the phrase incoherent mumbling. Did I hear that correctly?
Correct.
Who was making incoherent mumbling?
Mr. Cayer.
Okay, before or after? When did that happen?
That would have been once we had made physical contact with him, once we had taken him into custody. There were simple questions that I had asked as far as what is your name, and I didn't get a coherent response from him.
Can you elaborate what it sounded like?
I wouldn't be able to replicate it. I don't know what it would have sounded like.
Okay, so not actual words you could even make out, though?
Correct.
Okay, so when you say mumbling, you're not sure what was even coming out of his mouth?
Correct.
And you said you could tell that his face looked like he had been in a fight. Did you say that?
I don't know about what my exact words were there, if he had been in a fight, but it looked like like you said, he had a fat lip. He was fat lip. He was sweating. It wasn't like he was clean cut, just walking out of the house.
A fat lip would be consistent with somebody being struck in the face or the head. Fair to say?
Potentially.
Did you examine his body with your? Did you do any physical examination to see whether he had any lumps or bruises on his head?
No.
You just saw the fat lip and the disheveled appearance.
Correct.
Now, would it be fair to say there was no drugs or contraband located on Mr. Cayer in that area?
Not that I found.
And the observations of Cayer, you noticed that his jeans were torn, and you attribute that to the dog biting him, right?
Correct.
Okay, because you saw the dog engage with him.
Correct.
Now, when Mr. Cayer was found in that area there, I'm assuming you were walking up to that location. Is that fair to say?
When he was found in the grass?
Yeah.
Kind of through the woods. Correct.
Okay. And did you ever at any point see him running?
No.
Okay. You saw him laying there.
Correct.
Would it be fair to describe him as passive in a way in terms of how you found him?
Yes.
No active resistance.
Besides initially not showing us his hands, actively trying to hide his hands or keep him underneath his body. Once the canine engaged with him, and we were able to see his hands. After that, he never fought with us. He didn't show any other kind of active resistance towards us.
Got it. He wasn't struggling with the officers.
Correct.
And in terms of him laying there with his hands, you can't say what he did or didn't hear. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Okay. So Cayer is laying there in the grass. The dog bites him and he pulls his hands out. Fair to say?
For the most part, yes.
Okay. And there's no weapon in his hands, right?
Correct.
And you can see that because you're looking with your own eyes, right?
Correct.
And then that's when you go hands-on and start handcuffing him.
Correct.
And as you are handcuffing him, he's not twisting around trying to get you off of him or get away, right?
Correct.
So he complies with that process, would be fair to say.
Yes, sir.
And then you did do a report in this case, didn't you, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you had a chance to review it before your testimony today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fair to say your report is an accurate summary of what took place?
Yes, sir.
You describe Mr. Cayer, do you not, as partially walk under his own power. Did you use that expression?
In my report?
Yeah.
I believe that's what it says in my report, yes.
The male suspect was conscious and breathing and would only partially walk under his own power.
Yes, sir.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you explain what that phrase means, partially walk under his own power?
Yeah, I remember his legs being underneath him. As I had described, me being on his right-hand side, my left arm was kind of hooked underneath his shoulder, his right shoulder, and I needed to use some sort of strength or power to keep him up from either collapsing back down on the ground, falling back down on the ground, and get him moving out into the field itself. He didn't stand, he wouldn't have been able to stand unsupported on his own.
Okay. These things that you observed, mumbling incoherently, one or more injuries to the face, disheveled appearance, partially walking under his own power, would you agree with me that those things are consistent with somebody who suffered a head injury?
Potentially.
As a deputy, you've responded to accidents where people have had such injuries, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions, Mr. Lissay?
Deputy, you also had an opportunity to come into contact with suspects who are not fully cooperative with you when you're attempting to arrest them and move them. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
The same types of behaviors, like not walking under his own power and not choosing to fully cooperate with officers, is that also consistent with a non-cooperative suspect?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to specifically determine which was the case during this incident?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down. If you would put your shield in the box behind you for the used shield.
Thank you. Am I released then?
Yes, thank you. And if you could just put your mask back on, thank you.
Deputy Fairhawk as well as asking is released. I don't even know.
That's fine. Okay.
State's next witness.
Your Honor, next we would like to play the body camera footage from Logan Webster of the Oneida Police Department.
Okay.
Again, if we could just briefly make a record that the parties had stipulated that play the recordings from Officer Webster without the need to call him as a witness.
Is that the agreement, Mr. Cotton?
Mr. Cayer was asking you something. What did you say?
The parties had agreed that we could play the body camera footage from Officer Webster without the need to call Officer Webster as a foundational witness.
Thank you.
That's your agreement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The state is showing two of the videos. They will be Exhibit 1E1. That'll be the first video, and then 1E2.
Sheriff's Department! Brown County Sheriff's Department! Anybody in here? Is anybody in here? Just hold on it right now. There's one all over here. 6 round dispensary still on the plan. We got one around the back. Tell them complainant to walk towards the front door. Or out the front entrance. Yes. Okay. Hey, is anybody else being here besides you and my girlfriend? Where's your mom at? What's the mom's name? Ma'am, sir, what's your mom's name? Or her mom's name? What? Okay, I need you to walk towards my food pen over there. Okay, we need to get in there then. Family, you gotta come with us. We gotta get LT, we're going in. We're going in. Right? Yep.
Can we confirm how many patients?
Ravia! Plus!
At least 3.
Okay, I want you to hold right there.
Yep.
And we're going to do this. Okay, so step up with us. Very good. You're going to do the stairs. Hold on the stairs. Yep. Family, you are going to do that bathroom. Okay? Come with us. Come with us because you got our back. Okay? We're going to do the bathroom. All right. I'm going to walk by. Okay? What? Someone's in there. Someone's in there. Okay. Yeah. So keep going. 7. That's where you can hear that. Okay. What? Yeah, but where's the there? You got Review. 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 Stand still, plus. LP, you got the basement clear? You got one more? Not good. Like not good. Going to the left.
Yes, sir, we've got 2 more
Cover it back. I got you right back.
Right, you know.
Clear. Okay, we got 2 outside, 1 on the side only. 3 out, is that right? Oh, yeah.
That's the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
Get an extra one rolling, case. Check mark.
Lots. Okay. I want to go by. You guys are going to put that and have to grab it. Yep. Clear. Review. Right. Yep. Keep it straight on the left. Review. You Family? You got that order right, okay? Now, Rubia. Rubia. Review. Review. Ready? You got the back side? Yep. You got left side? I got right. Clear. Yeah. There is? All right. Well, guys, is that garage clear? No. Go ahead and clear. We're going to go in this way then? Is that clear inside? No. You're going to clear the garage right through there. You go, just go with it. Because that door's locked.
Like now?
Yeah.
Got one vehicle here.
Danny.
Back clear. Back seat clear. Front seat's clear. All right, covered vehicle there. And a second vehicle. All right, someone check those stairs back there. Those good? I got you covered.
I got this one.
Cover that car.
Yep, I got this one.
Thank you. No, we're going to. Okay, so I got blood in here. I got blood here. All right. Got clear wall?
Can you see on?
Got
No.
lots of blood.
Clear.
All right. When I get a DJ, I want you to clear that Honda security here. Okay? I'm going to cover this car right here. Watch your back, watch your back, watch your back.
Clear.
You're behind.
Clear. Yeah.
All right. Let's clear this old car here. Need one. One item.
Yep.
Ready?
Yep. Clear.
Everybody clear underneath the car here? Let's check secondary vents here. Yep, secondary check right here. Okay. Okay. All right. Garage is clear. Primary and secondary. Yeah. Just sit on the bed. No, they're good. Victims can sit on the bag and don't let anybody go in or out. All right, sorry. 1079. Okay. Don't let anybody go in the house, period. Just go sit on the back side. Okay? Do we get garage clear?
Yeah. No.
Okay. Can I take these guys clear real quick if it's open? All right. Perfect.
All right, and now I'm playing Exhibit 1E2.
Come this way. Logan. Derek, can you hold this area? I need to pull all that kind of stuff.
Recordings?
Yes, it is.
All right. Did you have a witness to call?
I do have another witness prepared, yes.
Okay.
The state would call Deputy Miller.
Okay. Deputy Miller, if you'd please come up to the witness stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Eric Miller, M-U-E-L-L-E-R.
Thank you. You may be seated, and then you may swap your face mask for the face shield that's on the counter. And then if you try to bring your face shield so it's over as the best you can by the microphone, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Lasek.
Deputy Miller, can you state for the record how you are employed?
I work for the Brown County Sheriff's Department. I've been there a little over 7 years.
And what is your current position with the Sheriff's Department?
I'm a patrol deputy.
Were you working in your capacity as a patrol deputy with the Sheriff's Department on June 7th, 2016?
Yes, I was.
Shortly after 8 p.m., were you dispatched to a call in the village of Hobart
Yes, I was.
on Riverdale Drive?
Correct.
Do you know what time the dispatch came out?
I believe it was around 8:13 p.m.
And what was the nature of the call based on the information provided to you by dispatch?
It came out as a weapons call. Note stated there was a male with a knife, and there were multiple people that were stabbed.
And Deputy, when you arrived on scene, were there other officers present?
Yes, there was.
Who was present when you arrived?
Deputy Dernbach was first on scene, and then I arrived shortly after, and then Deputy Raska arrived shortly after me.
Do you know if there were officers from other departments on scene as well?
There was from Hobart Lawrence and Oneida PD.
When you arrived on scene, what did you do?
I was advised to start the approach with Deputy Raska. We were on the east side of the residence and approached to the north.
Deputy Mueller, I'm showing you what's previously been marked as Exhibit 1G1. It's up on the board behind you, but it's also on the board here in front of council table. And then you'll also note there's a laser pointer to your left on the, where you stand there, see there? It's not the arrows, but the little button right above the arrows.
Okay.
If you could indicate where you parked your squad on that exhibit.
I would have parked right on there.
Okay. So can you indicate on that overhead where 1368 Riverdale Drive is? And there's another building, looks like a residence next to that. Okay, and that's, what address is that?
I believe that's 1378.
Okay. And you parked, I would say, just to the right of the driveway of 1378, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you indicated that you made your approach to the east of the driveway heading north, is that right?
Yep, right along these tree lines.
Okay, so the tree line just to the right of the driveway. Were you to the right of the tree line?
Correct.
Okay. As you made your approach toward the residence, what did you observe?
Observed individual laying face down in the middle of the backyard, right around there.
And you were with Deputy Raska, is that correct?
Correct.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1G2. What does that depict?
That would be the driveway to the call address, and where we approached along this tree line right here.
Okay, just to the tree line to the right of the driveway, you were to the right of the tree line.
Correct.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1G3. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
That would be the individual that we saw laying down in the 1378 backyard.
How was that individual when you first observed her?
Not moving, face down, and it appeared to be multiple stab wounds to the back of that individual.
And did you approach her?
We did.
And what happened then?
My partner, Deputy Raska, checked for a pulse. He then flipped her over on her back and started CPR as I was performing lethal cover around him.
Did you make any observations of the area around the female?
There appeared to be a blood trail that I noticed from this tree line down to where the individual was laying.
Okay. You indicated with the laser pointer from the area between the sheet back to the tree line to the left of the sheet. Is that correct?
Correct.
After Deputy Raska began to perform CPR, what happened then?
Shortly after that, rescue personnel arrived, along with multiple other deputies.
Was the female responsive at all when you arrived?
She was not.
And after rescue personnel arrived, then what happened?
I then was relieved by another deputy, and then I assisted with clearing the garage to the 1378 address.
showing you back what's been marked as Exhibit 1G1. Can you indicate on this diagram which garage you helped clear?
This one right here.
Okay, that's the garage immediately to the right of the residence.
Correct.
After you cleared that garage, then what did you do next?
We then approached to the back door of this residence, which the lights were on. We knocked multiple times, but there was no one home. No one came to the door.
What did you do after that?
I then walked to the rescue squad that was parked in the driveway right here, and then I was approached by the complainant, Joel Kennedy.
Joel had walked to your location?
He did.
And did you speak with him at all?
I did for a short time. I was asking the description of the suspect, which he stated the guy's name was Jake. He was wearing blue jeans, a dark colored t-shirt, and he had long brown hair.
Did you make any observations of Joel's person?
I noticed that he was holding his left hand, and I believe he was applying pressure to a wound that he had on his left arm, which was bleeding heavily.
Were you there to provide any assistance to him?
I did not. Shortly after he gave me the description, rescue personnel attended him, and then Deputy Reese arrived and went with rescue and Joel.
After you spoke briefly with Joel, then what did you do?
I was then asked by Sergeant Lau that Deputy Dernbach needed another deputy or two for a track, in which I walked to the west up the tree line, and I met with Deputy Dernbach, Deputy Raska, and I believe an Oneida officer in the corner of the residence, the northwest corner.
So you indicate you walked up the tree line on the left side of the driveway to the left side of the back of the residence where you met with the other officers.
Correct.
Do you know if Deputy Dernbach had already been conducting a track at that point in time?
From what I was told, I believe he was, and he was about to head into the tree line, which is where he stopped and waited for more officers.
So you arrived to assist him?
Yes, I did.
Do you know what other officers were present assisting him at that time?
It was Deputy Raska and then an Oneida officer.
What did you do once you arrived with Deputy Dernbach?
I was providing lethal cover on his left side as we approached into the tree line with the canine.
And which direction did you take with the canine?
It appeared to be directly north, started directly north into the tree line.
So it looks like from the laser pointer that there's kind of a wooded area to the back of the house, just immediately on top of the house, and then you went kind of straight into that wooded area from the clearing beneath it. Is that fair?
Correct.
About how long after you arrived by Deputy Dernbach to provide cover did you ultimately locate an individual?
It wasn't very long. From what I recall, we were going straight north, and then the canine alerted to the left, and then shortly after that is when we engaged the suspect.
Did you see the suspect prior to the canine engaging with him?
I did not.
Do you know about how far in front of you the canine was when he engaged the suspect?
I would guess it to be approximately 25 to 30 feet.
What are your observations when the canine engages?
At that point, officers started giving commands. We tactically approached the individual. Deputy Raska obtained suspect's left arm, and then I went and took custody of his right arm, and then he was placed in the handcuffs eventually.
Was the male cooperative with your commands?
He was not. He was not showing his hands at first, and it took a little bit of him resisting before we got him into custody.
After the male was placed in custody and the handcuffs were on him, what happened then?
We then walked him out to a clearing, which is where he was searched, patted down, and then we brought him from there to the rescue squad that was waiting on Camelot Court.
Did you assist in bringing him to the clearing?
I was walking with them, yes.
Did you make any observations of the defendant's person as he was walking to the clearing?
I noticed that he was very muddy, very dirty, appeared to be soaked in blood. Blue jeans are very dirty and ripped. He also had...
I'm sorry, could I ask that the lights be turned on, Your Honor? Thank you.
He also had some sort of a black mask that was around his neck that appeared to be soaked in blood as well.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1G6, can you identify that photograph?
That appears to be the area that the suspect was taken into custody.
And at the top of that photograph, what can you observe sort of near the top of the photograph?
This would have been the way that we walked out to the clearing.
And then in Exhibit 1G7, can you identify that photograph?
That would be briefly where we stopped and some items were taken off of him. And then we continued walking to the Camelot Court.
So you believe he was the area where the cone indicates and there's sort of a pile of things, you think that's the area where he was searched and items were taken off of him?
Correct.
Did you do that, or is that a different individual?
I did not.
But you were present when that happened?
Correct.
From that location, where was he taken?
We walked to Camelot Court. Do not know the specific address, but it was down Camelot Court where rescue was waiting.
Going back to 1G1, do you see the location where Mr. Cayer was taken on this particular overhead?
Correct.
That's the clearing where you brought him?
Correct.
And then where was he transported on to Camelot Court?
Then we walked out. Don't know exactly which way, but it was to Camelot Court. This area.
So there was a rescue stage. Was the rescue on the roadway, or do you know if it was in a driveway of one of the residences?
I do not recall.
Okay. And you assisted in moving Mr. Cayer to that location?
Correct.
How was he acting when you were transporting him to the rescue?
He wasn't walking fully on his own. The officer had to assist him with walking him to rescue.
Were you able to gauge whether that was because he was not cooperative or whether he had any injuries or concerns?
I do not recall.
I also want to talk to you about your observations of his clothing. What do you remember that he was wearing?
Blue jeans, a dark colored t-shirt, and he at some point had a bandage or a rag wrapped around one of his hands or fingers, and then that black face mask was around his neck.
Was it concealing or covering his face when you had contact with him?
Not when we made contact, no.
You made observations of them being dirty or blood-soaked, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. At some point in time, did you actually come into contact with that clothing?
I did, yes.
How did that happen?
At some point, I believe it was a Green Bay officer handed me the bag of the shirt and pants that were cut off by rescue, along with some other items, a watch, a belt, that blood-soaked rag was also handed over to me.
What did you do with those items?
I held on to them. I rode with rescue to the hospital, and they stayed in my possession until I later entered them into evidence at the sheriff's department.
Now you mentioned that you rode with rescue to the hospital. Where were you physically located?
I would have been sitting in the seat directly behind the cot that's in the back of the ambulance.
So you were in the ambulance with Mr. Cayer?
Correct.
Did you make any observations of Mr. Cayer while he was being transported by rescue?
He was making some statements in the back of the ambulance, comments such as fucking rapist, why didn't you fucking kill me? Ike, where is he? Can
you describe the nature of the comments? I mean, obviously you talked about the words that he used, but what was his tone of voice like? What was his speech pattern, things like that?
I would say a lot of yelling, screaming, not making a lot of sense with what he was saying.
Who else was in the rescue squad with you?
There was 3 rescue personnel. I believe a Mackenzie Teskey, an Olson, and I do not recall the 3rd individual.
Were you the only officer who was in there, squad?
Yes, I was.
And then what happened when you arrived on scene at the hospital?
Once we arrived, Deputy Nerat had been following us from the scene all the way to the hospital. And at that point, when the doors opened, he was behind with the squad iPhone, and he began a video recording.
What did you do after you arrived at the hospital and Deputy Nerat began filming?
I followed them. We went into the ER, into a room where staff attended to him.
What was your role on scene at that point?
Basically just standing by, still holding on to that evidence, vaguing it.
Did you make additional observations of the defendant while he was at the hospital?
Still making a lot of weird comments, kind of yelling, screaming a little bit yet.
At some point, did his demeanor change while he was at the hospital?
Not while I was there, no.
You indicated that you had responsibility for the clothing. What did you end up doing with the clothing that had been cut off the defendant?
We had bagged it, and then we had later replaced it into the evidence at the sheriff's department, which being that it was still soaked in blood, we put it in the drying chamber.
Okay, who's we?
Me and Deputy Nerat.
Okay, did you do that together?
Yes, we did.
And that was at the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
Correct.
Describe what it is to put something in the drying chamber.
Basically, you're taking the clothes out of the bag that it was first put in, putting it on a rack, putting it in this drying chamber, turning it on, locking it, and then I later put the key into evidence.
As you were putting those clothes in the drying chamber, were you able to make specific observations of the clothing itself?
Still noticed that it was very dirty, torn. That face mask, it was a black face mask with like a skeleton design on the front, and then there was 2 holes cut out where your eyes would potentially be.
And you mentioned they're blood soaked. How did you know or form the opinion that they were the clothing was blood soaked?
Just from the initial observations, everything that I saw, it appeared to be consistent with blood.
Was it physically wet at that point?
It was,
In addition
yes.
to being discolored?
Correct.
Deputy, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1G8. Can you indicate what that depicts?
Those appear to be the jeans that the defendant was wearing.
1G9?
Same pair of jeans.
And 1G10.
And again, the same pair of jeans.
So the discoloration that you see on there, was that consistent with the type of discoloration that you saw on the night when you took custody of those?
Correct.
1G11?
Appears to be the t-shirt that the defendant was wearing.
1G12?
Same t-shirt.
1G13?
Same t-shirt.
1G14?
Same t-shirt.
1G15?
Same t-shirt.
1G16?
The face mask that was around his neck.
1G17?
Same face mask.
Flipped over.
Turned inside out. Correct.
And the discoloration that you observed on the shirts and on the mask in the photograph, is that consistent with the discoloration and the blood-soaked description that you provided earlier?
Correct.
No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton?
Good afternoon. So you had, as I understand it, been present in the ambulance when Mr. Cayer was transported to the hospital?
Correct.
And that's when the state was asking you about things that you heard. One of the things I think you said was, Ike, where is he?
Correct.
What does that mean?
I have no idea.
Had you been asking something about, had you brought anything up to trigger that type of comment?
I did not.
Would we call these spontaneous utterances in a way?
You could say that, sure.
Okay, I guess what I'm asking is, was law enforcement engaging with Mr. Cayer in the ambulance, or were these just things that were coming out of his mouth?
Just things that were coming out of his mouth.
And you had said, I think, not making a lot of sense. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Correct.
Did any of it make any sense to you?
From the time in the ambulance, no.
Okay. And then the ambulance, how long would you say the ambulance ride to the hospital took?
15 minutes.
And was Mr. Cayer the whole 15 minutes just making statements, or were there periods of time where he was quiet?
I would say there was periods of time where he was quiet. Like I said, the statements that I have in my report are the ones that I remember him saying.
Did you have a recording of any of the statements that were made?
I did not.
No body cam on you?
No.
And you didn't use a personal phone or department phone to capture any of that, did you?
No.
So when you write the statements in your report, it's after you're done with your work, you went and typed the report and put the statements in there, right?
Correct.
And then Mr. Lassay asked you about Mr. Cayer at the hospital. You did see him in the hospital, right?
Correct.
So were you one of the officers or deputies who was present from the transfer out of the ambulance into the operating room? Were you present during that?
Correct.
And you made a statement just a few minutes ago that at the hospital there was, quote, lots of weird comments. Was that your testimony?
I don't recall saying weird comments.
Okay. How would you describe the statements Mr. Cayer was making at the hospital?
Statements that weren't making much sense.
Okay, so you don't think you said the phrase weird comments, but we could say not making sense.
Correct.
Okay. Not logical.
Correct.
And you said Mr. Cayer's demeanor did not change while he was at the hospital. What did you mean by that?
From the time that I was with him at the hospital, I want to say that there's times where he would stop talking. What the comments that you were saying just wasn't making sense.
Okay, in the same vein of Ike, where is he, fucking rapist, those types of things.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that's all.
Any additional questions, Mr. Lassay?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You may step down. If you put your face shield in the box behind you marked used face shield, and then replace it with your mask. Thank you. And he's free to go?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Your next witness? I think so. I think we can go a little bit longer before we take a break. Does the jury feel like we can go a little longer? All right, they're nodding yes. I was thinking we might try to go till 3 o'clock if everybody can go that long. Seeing nodding.
Okay. Yep. Say we'll call Officer Cody Christensen.
All right, thank you. Officer Christensen, if you'd please come up to the witness stand.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Cody Christensen,
Thank you. You'll see the face shield in front of you if you just replace your mask with that face shield. And then it looks like the speaker or the microphone might have gotten turned off. If you could press the button, the red light should be on. Thank you. And then if you just try to project your voice as much as you can into that microphone. Thank you.
Officer Christensen, can you state for the record where you are employed?
I'm employed through the city of Green Bay,
And what's your current role there?
patrol officer,
And how long have you been a patrol officer with the city of Green Bay?
approximately 5 years.
And were you working in your capacity as a patrol officer with the city of Green Bay on June 7th of 2016?
Yes,
At some point, were you called to assist in a scene in the village of Hobart?
yes.
Is that typical that you get called out to the village of Hobart to assist?
Not super typical, but at times.
What was your understanding of the nature of the call?
It was a weapons call, and the city of Green Bay was being requested for perimeter units.
Do you know about what time you responded to that scene?
I think it was around 8:30 p.m.
When you got to the scene, were there other officers already on site?
Yeah, there was multiple officers already on scene.
Do you recall specifically where you were asked to respond?
They were giving perimeter positions. All of those positions were already taken up by the time I got there. So then I assisted in clearing a nearby garage.
Officer, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 1H1. Can you indicate, is there a laser pointer up near you? So I think that it's the button just above the arrows is the laser pointer. A little button. Can you indicate, using that laser pointer, where you assisted clearing a garage?
It would have been this garage right here.
Okay. Do you know where the primary residence was where the incident occurred?
Yeah, it would be this residence right there.
Okay. And you were not involved with the initial approach to that residence?
No.
Okay. Your involvement was kind of secondary as other officers were already on scene?
Correct.
Right. So you assisted in clearing the garage of a different residence?
Correct.
And then what did you do?
So after we cleared this garage here, we exited, and I could hear other officers or deputies sounding like giving commands to someone. I recall before we cleared this garage that they were starting a canine track in the area, so I'm assuming that that's who was giving commands. So I kind of ran towards where they were giving commands, which was this wooded area up in here.
And when you ran toward that area, where did you go?
So I went through this clearing here. I don't recall if I went on this side of the house or if I went through this clearing here to get back into the woods, but somehow I got to this area of the woods.
Do you believe you followed the path that you just used with the laser pointer, which is that you entered the wooded area from the clearing immediately behind the house and then went north through the woods?
This way you're saying?
With respect to when you entered the wooded area, or how you entered the wooded area?
I can't say for certain which side I was, which way I came from. I can't say if I came from this side or from this side over here.
Okay. So you do believe that you came from the bottom of that wooded area?
Correct.
All right. And that's the wooded area just to the north of the house?
Correct.
When you got into the wooded area, what did you observe?
So I observed a male with shoulder-length brown hair. The Brown County canine was engaged with him in a bite, and then I moved in to assist and place that male into handcuffs.
Were there other officers that were physically hands-on with the defendant at that time?
Yeah, I believe there was multiple. I can't recall exactly who. I know Deputy Rascal was one for sure.
Once the male was placed into custody, then what happened?
So it was pretty dark and thick in there, so we wanted to get him out so we could see better and have a little more room to work. So we brought him to, I don't know if you can still see this laser pointer. There's a clearing right here, which would be like the backyard area of this residence. And then there we laid him down and started taking items out of his pockets, assessing any injuries, making sure he didn't have any weapons, stuff like that.
When you arrived on scene and the male was being placed into custody, did you indicate or do you recall whether or not he was cooperating with commands?
I don't recall.
But you were part of the group that physically transported him out to that clearing area?
Correct.
Do you know whether he was walking on his own or whether he needed assistance?
I believe he was walking. We were just holding on each side of him.
I'm going to ask you to look at Exhibit 1H3. What is depicted in that photograph?
That looks like the area where we brought him out of the woods, and that's that clearing area. And this looks like where, yeah, this is where we emptied all of his belongings.
When you say this, on the left side of the photograph, there's a cone to the left of sort of a pile of stuff. You believe that's the area where you emptied his pockets?
Correct.
And you were one of the officers who specifically assisted in taking items out of his pockets?
Correct.
Did you note anything specific about the items that you were removing?
The only thing I can specifically remember was some cord. I wouldn't call it rope, I wouldn't call it string, kind of in between.
Did you note that he had a lot of stuff in his pockets, or only a few items?
Just a few items.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 185. What does that photograph appear to depict?
That looks like the things that we pulled out of his pocket. So this is that cord that I was referencing that I recall.
And you believe that the items, once they were taken off, they were left there?
Correct.
Okay, then what happened with those items, or what was your role with respect to those items?
So I assisted in walking the gentleman up to the roadway to turn him over to the rescue squad, and then I went back to this pile of items just to stand by and secure for evidentiary value.
Do you know if when you went to bring Mr. Cayer out to the rescue squad, was there a different officer who was standing on scene watching over those items?
That I do not recall.
When you returned back to take watch of those items, was there another officer on scene that you were?
That I can't say for certain.
Okay. And then you stayed with those items until what?
I stayed with the items until I was relieved by a deputy.
Okay. Do you know about how long you were out there with them?
With the property?
Yeah.
I couldn't say for certain. I'd say like 15 minutes or so.
All right. No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination, Mr. Cotton?
Just a couple questions. Good afternoon. So you found Mr. Cayer just laying down, right?
At the time that I got to him, he was lying on the ground.
Okay, and you never saw him running or anything like that?
No, I did not.
Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. If you would just put your face shield in the box behind you for the used face shield and replace it with your mask. Thank you. And he's released and free to go? All right, you're free to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
The state's next witness.
No, we were planning to go to 3 o'clock, but I think the next witness might be a little bit longer.
Okay.
If we could take a break now and then come back with that next witness,
All right.
that might work best.
Seems like a good idea. Thank you for letting me know the schedule. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break. Let's make it about 15 minutes. We'll come back about 5 to 3. You're reminded not to discuss the case with yourselves, amongst yourselves, or with anyone else. And if you'd like to go outside and take off your masks or whatever, you're free to do that at this time. Please stand for the jury. Please be seated. Thank you. All right. Anything we need to address prior to taking our break? No. All right. The only thing I just wanted to make a record of really quickly, Mr. Cotton, is I know before we took the lunch break, you said something about hearsay exception that might become relevant for some other witnesses, but I just wanted it to be clear that wasn't raised when the other witness had testified, correct?
Right.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll be in recess then until 5 to 3. So, Mary, come on.
judges.
Pardon you? I keep forgetting. Return to the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, we took a few minutes to talk about the schedule, and probably if I tell you this, something will make me appear like I'm not being accurate, but we think we're going to finish a little bit early today. That's the good news for you. We have some legal issues to deal with, so we won't finish early, but I think we'll be able to excuse you early. I'd ask you to consider, though, tomorrow, they have some witnesses that are going to take longer, and there's a real possibility we'll end up with a witness that we need to finish and could end up going a little bit longer. So I just want to give you that heads up ahead of time in case that does happen tomorrow. All right. With that, would the state like to call their next witness?
Yes, the state will call Special Agent Shellhorn.
Special Agent Shellhorn, if you'd please come up to the witness stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Kira Shallhorn, Kyrashallhorn.
Thank you. You may be seated. And if you would like to swap out your face mask for a face shield, there's one in front of you. And then if you do your best to direct your voice to the microphone. Thank you.
Okay.
Special Agent Shellhorn, can you state for the record how you are employed?
I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation.
And how long have you been with, they call it DCI, right?
Yes, DCI. I've been there for 26 years.
And did you have prior law enforcement experience before your work at DCI?
I did not. I started there right after grad school.
Can you explain the role of a special agent at DCI?
Yeah, special agents at DCI, we work under the Attorney General's office. We're state law enforcement officers. We are asked to assist local law enforcement in cases throughout the state that are complex investigations that they need help with. So we're asked to come in from other agencies that ask us to assist them in major crimes.
Do you have any specific experience or training in terms of sort of processing complex crime scenes?
Yes, I do. I've been in what's called our major crimes area for the last 10 years, where I've worked on multiple homicides, officer-involved death investigations. I've been to trainings from the International Association of Homicides Detectives, our Wisconsin Association of Homicide Investigators. I myself teach at our 2-week death investigation school where we teach local law enforcement about conducting death investigations.
What was your role in assisting the local agencies in the crime scene at 1368 Riverdale Drive in the village of Hobart from June of 2016?
DCI was called to help out in this case, and I was there, one of the first agents that got there that evening, probably a couple of hours after the homicides had occurred, and stayed there for the next 3 or so days processing the scene along with the crime lab, collecting evidence, and there was a lot of investigation to be done. So we were there for several days securing that scene, collecting evidence from that scene.
You indicated that the crime lab was on scene. Do you recall specifically who you worked with primarily?
I worked with a team out of the Wausau office. Katie Hoffmeyer was the team leader. There were 2 other analysts from the Wausau crime lab that I worked with mainly, Michelle Freund and Zi Zhang.
And what were their respective roles, if you recall correctly?
Well, Kate Hoffmeyer was the team leader, so she would be kind of in charge of the team, if you will. I don't recall if Michelle was maybe a little bit newer and in training. I don't recall that part for sure. I know that Z was the one who was taking photographs as we found items. So we worked together we as law enforcement worked together with the crime lab members to discover the evidence that was there, and we, in concert, in this one especially because of the amounts of evidence, we worked in concert to, they photographed the evidence, and then I helped them to collect that evidence that we found.
In addition to the crime scene unit out of Wausau, were there additional members of the crime lab that were called to the scene as well?
There were. We had all 3 of our crime lab response teams respond to this. Over those 3 days that we were there, there was a team out of our Milwaukee crime lab and a team out of our Madison crime lab.
And because there were 3 teams on site, were there also multiple DCI agents that were there to assist?
There were.
And what was your specific role?
Well, I had several different roles. Being one of the first people there out of our Appleton office, I did some walkthroughs at the very beginning to see all of the parts of the scene, both interior and exterior. Then we kind of split up, and I went with the crime lab team from Wausau, and we handled what I called the outside scenes of both the main residence at 1368, a residence next door at 1378, and some neighboring properties. I also was involved in doing a search the last days of the basement of the house. So my role mainly was outside during the main collecting of the evidence, but I also was inside the house on several of those days, seeing items of evidence there as well.
In addition to the DCI agents, are there other law enforcement agencies that are assisting in the evidence collection or the overall scene search?
Yes. We were asked to help out by the Hobart-Lawrence Police Department. Brown County officers were there, and we were all working in concert together in this vast crime scene to collect evidence, find evidence, collect evidence.
Can you discuss sort of the understood process between all the law enforcement agencies and the crime scene analysts from the lab as to how that evidence discovery and collection would work?
Well, I think that it may have been handled a little bit differently with some of the different teams, but in general, like my team, I offered to help because there were so many things. Z would take the photographs as we would find things. First, the crime lab team went in after we got our search warrants. They went in and took photographs before we ever went in and did anything. So they took overall photographs, they took mid-level photographs, and then photographs of the particular pieces of evidence. Once those photographs were taken, either Katie as the team leader or I, offering to help her, would actually physically seize those items of evidence, place them in bags, tape them up. I know that I acted as the evidence custodian for all of those outdoor scenes, and I would have then given those sealed pieces of evidence to officers with the Hobart-Lawrence Police Department to keep them as evidence, and then later on they would be transferred for additional analysis after they were seized.
Okay. Did you have an understanding as to which department was going to be responsible for storing the evidence, collecting and storing the evidence?
It was going to be the Hobart-Lawrence Police Department that was going to store all of the evidence.
So once the items of evidence were processed, they are transported then or given to the Hobart-Lawrence Police Department for storage and safekeeping?
Yes.
And just the general notion of someone finds an item of evidence, can you walk me through what that process would be? If a particular item is located in an area, what is the process then for documenting and collecting?
If we found something that had not already been specifically documented by Z with the crime lab, we would ask him to come over and photograph it before we touched it. I was wearing gloves that day. We'd be wearing gloves. We would take the item, and if it were something small that could be placed into a paper bag, we would do that, place it in a paper bag, put evidence tape around it. If I were the one collecting it, I would put my initials and the date that it was seized on that. There were a lot of items of evidence from different places, so there were different logs of numbers. Items, 1, 2, 3 from my standpoint. Items 1, 2, 3 in the garage area. Items 1, 2, 3 in the house area. So all of those were kept by the different teams that were working, and then again transferred over to the Hobart-Lawrence Police Department.
In terms of decisions that are made about what items are going to be processed or tested by the lab or analyzed further, Where do those decisions typically get made?
Well, the Crime Lab has some rules overall with regard to what can be submitted and how many items at a time can be submitted in homicide cases, in all different sorts of cases. So we kind of know those general rules. And then those decisions are made by the case detectives. We had a couple of us from DCI who were working as the lead special agents on that. Investigator Lieutenant Dan Van Lannen was the lead for the Hobart Lawrence Police Department. I believe some of those decisions were made in talking with you as the DA as far as what items potentially would be pertinent to determine what had happened in the case for the investigation.
From your standpoint as an experienced investigator, what are the types of things you're ultimately attempting to determine before deciding whether a certain piece of evidence is going to be processed?
What the role that piece of evidence had to do with the crime, what types of evidence may be able to be found on that, whether it be DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, footprint evidence, clothing of potential suspects that may have DNA of the victims on it, several different things. And I'm speaking to this case in particular. There are other types of specialties that the Crime Lab has that weren't used in this case, but DNA, fingerprinting.
I want to draw your attention to some of the specifics of this case, and we'll sort of do a walkthrough, but is it fair to say that based on your role and your experience at the scene and the amount of time that you spent there, that you are comfortable discussing all aspects of the scene, that you saw all aspects of the scene that were essential to this investigation?
Yes, I am. I did. I was there for several days.
I'm submitting what's been marked as Exhibit 3. I do have an identical copy here in my computer, and we did provide previously a copy of this presentation to the defense. They're aware of what we're using and displaying here today. Special Agent Shellhorn, can you just describe generally what this document is?
Yes, it's a diagram that we created. It's an overview photograph from Google Maps showing the scene itself with some text boxes showing where particular items of evidence were found on scene. That area in the center, that I did bring a laser pointer so that I can point things out. If you want me to just kind of explain what we're looking at.
Yes, please feel free to do so.
So this right here is the home that we're talking about. It's 1368 Riverdale. This is Riverdale right here. This is the home next door at 1378 Riverdale. This is the driveway and the tree line leading up to the house. Mr. Cayer was found back here, hiding in this wooded area at a property, adjacent property to 1368. This is Camelot Court here, so the backyard of this residence is 4180 Camelot Court, and he was found back here. And this is the home that we're discussing here.
And were you specifically involved in the creation of this diagram and then the contents of it in terms of the photos that are attached to it?
Yes, I was. I helped one of our people who are much more adept at working something like this, then let them know where to put everything.
Very good. And you indicated that the diagram itself is essentially taken from Google Maps. Do you think it's a fair and accurate description of the outlay of the property on June 7th of 2016?
I do.
And again, you had the opportunity to walk all aspects of this scene and observe the items indicated, but then also observe the property itself.
Yes.
I'll sort of walk you from right to left, from the bottom right of this scene in a counterclockwise direction. So we'll start with the area that indicates Sabrina. Can you describe the area where Sabrina was located?
Yes. Sabrina was located here in the backyard of the residence next door, 1378. There was a blood trail of both bloody footprints and blood drops that led from the garage area of her house across the garage through kind of a little barrier, a little wooded area of trees separating those two properties. And she was located in the backyard of 1378 Riverdale.
Her name. So this photograph under Sabrina's name, what does this depict?
This right here is Sabrina covered in a white sheet. This right here is that area of the woods that I talked about, that there was the blood trail leading from the 1368 home. The garage is back here. That blood trail came through here, and Sabrina ended up here in the backyard.
Was Sabrina's body still on scene when you arrived on scene?
It was.
Okay, so you had the opportunity to observe her on scene?
I did.
And then you personally had the opportunity to observe what you described as the blood trail, not just in the grassy or wooded area, but then also on the driveway and coming from the garage.
Yes, I did.
As we move up counterclockwise, the next item indicated here is the knife. Were you involved in locating a knife on scene near 1368 Riverdale Drive?
Yes, I was. As I had said just a minute ago, there were the bloody footprints and blood drops coming from across here on that other side of that tree line where Sabrina made it through. The knife was located in the middle of that tree line.
Were you present when the knife was located?
I was. This
What's
is
depicted in this photograph? It's the first photograph that we click once we go under the heading knife.
Yes. This photograph shows that tree line between this right here is the garage area, the driveway area of 1368 Riverdale. This is the backyard of 1378 Riverdale. And right in this area, by this tree line right here, is where the knife was located.
And what's depicted in the second photograph under the heading knife?
That's the knife that was located in that tree line there.
And the photograph as it's depicted here, is this the position of the knife as it was found?
Yes, it is.
And obviously there's I would call that a number 13. What is the number 13 on that photo?
That would have been the crime lab number that was used that was the 13th item of evidence from the outdoor scenes that was collected.
So then once this item was located, what would be the process of taking that into custody then?
I would have, again, had gloves on. I would have taken that knife. I would have placed it into a paper bag and sealed it up with my initials. Actually, there were several people helping out with this process. Now that I think about it, it may not be my initials on those bags. It could be one of my coworkers who was helping with that process. But our initials and date would be put on the packaging, and then I kept all of that until it was turned over to Hobart Lawrence.
All right. And continuing up, the next item counterclockwise is indicated as a tire iron. I believe that the the line for tire iron goes to inside the residence. You indicated that you were not primarily responsible for the processing of the inside of the residence, but did you have an opportunity to observe that tire iron when it was in the residence?
I did.
And is it your understanding that you observed it in the location where it was initially found?
Yes.
And the same process that you just described for the knife, it's your understanding that was also used to process that tire iron?
Yes.
Do you know what portion of the residence that was located in?
That was in the living room.
The first photograph under the tire iron, what does that depict?
This is the front door of the residence. This is the street view that we looked at earlier. This is looking from a sliding patio door that we entered from when we entered the scene. And this is the living room area. The garage is this way. The rest of the house with the bathroom and bedrooms are this way. This is the living room. And right here on the floor is the tire iron.
And what's depicted in the second photograph?
That's the tire iron that was located in the living room.
The next photograph up counterclockwise is labeled Heesun, and what is indicated in that location?
Located in a bathroom down the hallway from the living room. Heesun was in that bathroom in that bathtub.
Again, was Heesun's body still on scene when you arrived on that scene?
Yes, it was.
And you had an opportunity to observe her where she was located on scene and before she was transported off-site by the medical examiner?
Yes, I did.
What is depicted in the photograph under Heesun?
This is a picture of Heesun in the bathtub.
And is this consistent with what you observed when you saw her in the bathroom?
Yes.
The next item to the left, counterclockwise, is the heading is Jacob located by law enforcement. Does the arrow or the line accurately depict roughly where Mr. Cayer was located?
Yes, it does.
And you had an opportunity to go out and specifically observe that location?
Yes.
Had that been marked by other agencies, or how did we know that sort of?
Yes, it had been marked by other law enforcement that had located him, and so the area where he had been in the woods was marked, as well as some personal items that had been on his person were also marked. They were out here when they were taken off him, so there was a cone in the area where he was, and then some of the items that were taken off him were a little bit farther out.
What's depicted in that first photograph?
This is the cone near the personal items that were taken off of Mr. Cayer, and in here is the area where he was located by law enforcement, where he had been hiding that night.
And then the rest of the photo depicts sort of the clearing where he was brought out. Is that fair?
Yes, the house that in question that we're talking about is here. The 4180 Camelot Court is here, so this is that backyard area. He would, someone would have run or made their way back this way into this wooded area. After he was found by law enforcement, they brought him out here and took these items off of him.
And what does the second photograph depict?
These are the items that were found on Mr. Cayer when he was arrested. There's some pieces of cloth, some rope, a couple of, this glove for sure. I was never 100% sure if this was law enforcement glove or a glove that he had on him, but two individual gloves, a Newport cigarette pack, and a Cricket smartphone, cell phone.
I'm going to ask you a question about that Cricket smartphone. As part of your work as a DCI agent, are you familiar with the analytical tool Cellbrite?
Yes, I am.
What is Cellbrite?
I mean, I'm not super familiar with it. I know that it's a program that our analysts use in order to extract information off of cell phones when we get search warrants for them. The analysts are the one that are trained on how to use that software, those pieces of equipment. They know how to download information from the cell phones. Then they're given back to the agents who. And I've had an opportunity to be able to look at that product that Celebrate produces, the extraction report of information that is available on people's cell phones.
So in terms of conducting the actual extractions, that's typically not your role. That's the role of the forensic specialist with DCI. Is that right?
That's correct.
In terms of reviewing the extraction within the Celebrate program to look at the substantive contents of the phone, that is something that you are familiar with?
Yes.
And in this particular case, did you have an opportunity to view the Cellbrite extraction that was generated from that Cricket phone that was found on Jacob Cayer's person?
Yes, I did.
And what were your observations of that review of the extraction?
We originally thought that phone was Mr. Cayer's because it was found on him. When we looked at the Celebrate extraction, we noticed that it was not Mr. Cayer's phone. It was, we believed it was Sabrina's phone. It had photographs, selfies of Sabrina on it, some instant messages. There was nothing to indicate that it was Mr. Cayer's phone. Everything indicated that it was Sabrina's phone.
As we continue to move counterclockwise, the next heading indicated there is Sabrina's bedroom window. Can you describe where that's located in the home?
That is actually a basement window, so it's very low from the outside. It's Sabrina's bedroom window in the bottom of the residence, in what I call the basement, and the window is at ground level there.
And were you able to make any specific observations about the window itself?
Yes, I saw that the window itself was open. Partly it was not closed all the way. From the outside you could see that it was open. You could see that long grass blades were tucked underneath the open portion of the window. And from the inside of the window you could see that the frame was somewhat broken. And again you could see the grass coming into the interior of the home from outside.
The first picture there under that heading, what does it depict?
This is the window in question that we're looking at, and you can see that it is open from the rest of the house.
And the second picture?
Same thing, just showing the location of where that window was near the back side of the house.
And then the third photo under that heading?
This is the interior of the house. This was Sabrina's bedroom in the basement. Again, you can see that the frame around the window is broken, the wood is broken, and there's fresh, long grass blades coming up into the interior of the house.
And you were part of the team that was responsible for processing the basement, right?
Yes.
All right. The next subheading counterclockwise is entitled Jacob's Bike. What is depicted here in that first photograph under Jacob's Bike?
This is a picture that's a little bit farther away. It shows a tree line leading up to Sabrina and Heesun's house, and this shows the tire of the bike, and this, you can't really see it very well, but this is the backpack that was located. And the reason this far away shot is to show just the distance between them. But the bike was located in that tree line.
And then the second photo under bike?
This is the bike as I saw it that day. It's flipped over onto its handlebars and seat with the chain off of the bike.
And the final grouping on the bottom is entitled Jacob's Backpack. Can you tell us more about that? I think you already touched on it a little bit.
Yes, so one of the things that some of the special agents did is we conducted what's called a line search. So there were several of us that searched all throughout this property in a line, and while we were doing that, we located a backpack that was kind of hidden in this tree line here. So we pulled that out and collected it as a piece of evidence, opened it up on scene just to kind of see vaguely what was in it, and then we took it back to, after it was seized as a piece of evidence, we took it back to the Hobart Lawrence Police Department, and Detective Lieutenant Dan Van Landen and I looked through and inventoried all of the items that were in the backpack.
So you had an opportunity to observe the backpack as it lay on scene and to look inside of it briefly while on scene?
Correct.
And then you had another opportunity personally to go with Lieutenant Van Landen to the Hobart Lawrence Police Department and document specifically everything that was inside there?
Yes.
So the first photo under backpack, same photo that we've already seen, correct?
Yes.
And this accurately depicts where the backpack was located by law enforcement on scene?
Yes.
Second photo, what does that indicate?
That is the backpack after it was kind of dragged out of that wood line and opened up so that we could see what was in it. It became item number 27 from the outdoor scene and was then taken as evidence by me and given to one of the Hobart Lawrence officers.
All right. The third photo under that.
This is the driver's license that was in the backpack. It belongs to Jacob Cayer.
And what was the date of issuance on that license?
December 10th of 2015.
What does this photograph depict?
These are just some of the items that were located in the backpack. There's the driver's license right there. There were some thumb drives, one of which had the name Jacob Cayer on it, and just some of the other random items that were located in that backpack when we inventoried them.
Is there anything of particular interest to your investigation depicted on the fourth photograph under the backpack heading?
I noted the zip ties, which were something that was found in the bathroom with Heesun. I noticed this duct tape and this hammer with the duct tape on it. The tire iron that was found in the living room had duct tape wrapped around it, similar to this hammer having duct tape wrapped around it. I noted that there were individual gloves or mittens, similar to that glove that was on Mr. Cayer when he was taken into custody. And then the driver's license and the thumb drive kind of indicating who the backpack belonged to.
And the fifth photograph under the backpack heading?
Again, just more items that were located in the backpack, of note being these zip ties and the individual single gloves that didn't have a match to them.
And the sixth photograph, is this also from the backpack?
Yes. Just some other random, some like paint scrapers, a railroad tie, some drill bits. There were a lot of miscellaneous items in the backpack. And there were several different tools that were located in the backpack, some pliers, some screwdrivers, knives, ammo, just again random pieces of equipment, tools. This is some of the zip ties that were there, different colored zip ties, white, yellow, black. And this is a close-up of that hammer with the duct tape wrapped around it. It's fashioned with a carabiner attached to a rope attached to the end of it. You can see what it looks like from the picture.
Special Agent Shellhorn, we asked you previously about reviewing the forensic download from Cellbrite with respect to the cricket phone that was located on Jacob Cayer's person. As part of your work in investigating this case, did you have an opportunity to review any other downloads that were generated from different phones?
Yes, I did.
And in particular, which downloads did you review?
There was a second phone that was located in the residence that we believed to be Sabrina's phone. And then there was a phone that belonged to Joel Kennedy, who he gave us permission to download that phone that night from the hospital. And I viewed both of the extractions from those two phones.
Let's start with the extraction from the second phone believed to belong to Sabrina. What kind of phone was that?
I'm sorry, which one?
The second one belonging to Sabrina.
Oh, okay. That was a AT&T ZTE flip phone that was located in the residence. Crime lab reports indicate that phone was located near the laundry room door in the residence.
You did have an opportunity to review that extraction using the forensic software?
Yes, I did.
What types of things were you looking for when you reviewed that extraction?
I was looking for information to see a timeline of the timing of events that happened, if there was anything pertinent to our investigation of who may have done this, what the last texts and phone calls and messages were like on the phone.
Was there anything notable about the recent text messages or phone contacts?
There were texts from Sabrina and Joel from the time frame of 7:05 to 7:06 p.m. on that June 7th. The texts, there was just a couple of short text exchanges back and forth. Joel saying that
Objection, hearsay.
They're not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. They're being offered to show what she observed on there, and frankly for the timeline, not the content itself. And frankly, they're also, we can show the actual messages. I mean, we're not suggesting what the content provides, but there's no question about it. The nature of a hearsay objection is that we don't know whether or not someone actually said that word. This is an extraction from the cell phone that actually indicates the language itself. So there isn't any question about the reliability of it. It is what it is.
Regarding reliability, though, I don't think she's familiar with how Cellbrite extraction works. I think she testified to that earlier.
Do you sustain the objection?
So you indicate there are text messages between Joel and Sabrina at 7:05 and 7:06?
Yes.
Were there any other relevant pieces of information related to the timeline that you located on that particular cell phone?
There were additional text messages on the phone after that time frame, the last one being 8:05 p.m. from that phone.
And then were there other text messages received on that phone after 8:05?
Yes, there were.
From which party?
The extraction that I looked at indicated they were from an individual named Dustin.
And was that a party that Sabrina had been sending messages to previously?
According to the phone, yes.
Was there anything threatening about the nature of those text messages?
No.
And in fact, then those subsequent text messages went unanswered?
Correct.
The last time Ms. Teague sent anything was 8:05?
Correct.
Likewise, did you looked at an extraction from a phone believed to be Joel Kennedy's phone that he gave permission to extract? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what types of pertinent information were you looking for there?
Again, the same types of information that I was looking for on the other phones that we looked at, information regarding a timeline of when events may have happened, anything pertinent to the investigation, who may have been involved in the crimes.
And what pertinent information did you observe on that extraction?
The same text messages from the flip phone that we believe to be Sabrina's were on the cell phone of Joel's. The same to and from cell phone messages at 7:05 and 7:06.
Is there anything threatening about those messages?
No.
Any other pertinent information that you discovered from that extraction?
In looking at the web history on that cell phone, there were several indications that phone was hitting on a Wi-Fi at Walmart at 7:50 that evening.
I'm going to object to that and move to strike. It's beyond her area of expertise.
Mr. Cayer?
Have you approached?
Yeah. Mr. Cotton,
Is the state done with that witness?
what's your position with regard to your objection?
Withdraw the objection, thank you.
So the witness is allowed to answer?
I believe she has answered that she observed that note about the Wi-Fi at Walmart at 7:50 p.m.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
I just want to do just a brief clarification on this photo again. Obviously, the knife in the area where Sabrina is located, on this particular overhead photo, it looks like we're right in the middle of a tree.
Right.
But you think that the actual photographs themselves, is the tree that's kind of blocking the view, is that depicted accurately in this photograph here?
Yes, it is. Those items would have been located under the tree, and the photograph is from above the tree.
So underneath the tree line on this particular is a clearing, and that's just a tall tree that's sort of blocking the view. Fair?
Yes.
No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton, cross-examination?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
No.
So, as I understand it, you're basically a special agent with DCI, right?
Yes.
And in this case in particular, you spent 3 or so days at the crime scene, right?
Yes.
And I want to just ask you some questions about some of the evidence that was recovered, okay?
Okay.
As I understand it, you and Lieutenant Van Lannen actually recovered the backpack that we saw the picture of, right?
Yes.
And meaning it was found at the scene, it was taken as is, and then inventoried elsewhere, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to assume you're familiar with virtually every piece of evidence in this case, having looked at so much evidence. Fair to say?
I don't know if I know every piece from this case. There was a lot, but I'm familiar with the major pieces of evidence.
With regard to the, remember we saw some pictures of gloves and you were asked about gloves?
Yes.
You would agree with me that none of the gloves had any blood on them, right?
None of those gloves from that were on Mr. Cayer? No, they did not.
Okay. And then there was maybe some rubber or plastic gloves at the scene that you don't know whether those belong to law enforcement or not.
Correct. That one glove I did not know.
Now, The backpack that you recovered was a brown Adidas backpack, fair to say?
Yes.
And in the backpack, I didn't actually add up the number of items, but dozens and dozens of things were in the backpack, fair to say?
Yes.
Including things like deodorant, that was something in there, right?
Yes.
Trail mix.
Yes.
So we have food and clothes and can openers and things like that.
Yes.
Or a can opener, I should say. And frankly, if we're looking through the backpack, you had pointed out I think at one point we had zeroed in on that hammer. Remember the hammer we had seen with the duct
Yes.
tape on it? But of course, there was many things in there that, like a poncho and keychain and socks and things like that, right?
Right.
And you made a whole list of all the things that were in there for
Yes,
your
I did.
report. And as far as you could tell, there wasn't blood on any of the items inside the backpack. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Were you, I think one of the photos we had seen was, it looked like USB drives or thumb drives. Is that something that was located in Mr. Cayer's backpack?
Yes.
Multiple ones or just one?
There were multiple.
Multiple USB drives.
Yes.
So I hold up what I'm showing here, something like this, right? That you would plug into a computer.
Yes.
Did you have any of those drives sent out to be analyzed?
Yes, I believe all of them were.
You are not an analyst, as I understand it, correct?
That's correct. I'm not.
So, but you as a special agent, when you have a piece of evidence, you can send it out to the tech team to have them examine it, right?
Right.
And you said there were 3 thumb drives that were recovered?
I was thinking there were 4, but I don't know for sure.
And you believe each one, your report indicates 4 thumb drives. So that would be accurate, wouldn't it?
Okay.
And one of them actually had the name Jacob Cayer on it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you review the contents of each one of those USB analyzed devices?
There were those 4 devices plus a lot of other devices that were analyzed. I did not look at the analysis of all of the electronic devices in this case.
Was there one in particular that was only recently examined within the last couple of weeks?
One of the thumb drives?
Yeah.
I
say the last month or so.
I was thinking there was a cell phone that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
There was. I know what you're talking about now. I'm sorry. Yes.
And you know it because you actually got the report and got the analysis and you examined it, right?
I didn't get. I was a part of. I knew that one had not been examined until fairly recently. I was involved in a part of that. I did not examine it.
Okay. The purpose of examining things like USB drives would be to see whether there's something that provides evidence for the crime. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Somebody maybe films a video saying they're going to do a particular thing that would be relevant, right?
Correct.
And you're aware that in many cases Mr. Cayer did have a habit of filming videos of himself. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Dozens of videos of himself.
Yes.
In fact, just sitting in front of a computer, just talking, basically.
Yes.
Okay. And there's quite a few of those that, have you had a chance to see those videos, any of them?
I know that they exist. I didn't really watch many of them. Some of my coworkers did. I did not.
Okay. But as somebody who was involved in spearheading the investigation, there was nothing about those videos that provides any further evidence of why this crime occurred. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. That's correct.
In other words, he's not making threats towards Sabrina or Heesun or anything like that, right?
No.
And in terms of prior threats towards them, would you agree that you aren't able to establish prior threats being made by Cayer towards these people? Would you agree with?
All right, did you want to approach?
Sorry, I'll withdraw that question, Judge.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you some questions about evidence, generally speaking, in this case. You had testified before there was quite a bit of evidence, right?
Yes.
Different pieces of evidence have different values to an investigation, right?
Yes.
Something very important is blood evidence. That's something that's important, right?
Yes.
And were you involved in taking any of the blood samples from this house?
The crime lab would have been the ones that would have physically taken them. I mean, I saw them doing it. I would have gotten them after the crime lab took the swabs and put them, I would have collected them then, but I did not physically take the swabs of the blood.
Okay, because you had said before that the lab has rules on what they'll take for testing. You remember that?
Yes.
So when the samples are taken from the home, what I want to know is whether you're involved in making decisions about what gets tested ultimately.
Sometimes the crime lab is there making those decisions on their own. Sometimes we're working in concert with them. There was so much blood evidence in this case that we were working together to decide what areas we wanted blood swabs from, and we couldn't have taken everything. There was just too much.
And the reason you would take blood swabs and test them is to figure out whose DNA is where. That's one reason, right?
Yes.
Does DCI, it's the Department of Criminal Investigation, right?
Division of.
Or division.
That's fine.
Are there blood splatter analysts in your division?
We don't have blood spatter analysts, no.
Okay, so no such expert was brought in to study the blood splattering in this case.
There are a few agents, including myself, who went to a 1-week class on blood spatter evidence, and there is a crime lab analyst who, I don't know if he's been qualified as an expert in that or not, but he has done training on that. He's the one person at the crime lab that knows about those things. He was brought to that scene, and he was there as a part of all of the rest of the crime lab analysts that were there.
Okay, but you're not here to offer any testimony about blood splatter evidence or draw any conclusions from that, are you?
No.
Now, the bike that you testified to, the bike and the backpack were located within fairly close proximity to each other. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And why was if you know, you did notice that the chain was off the bike, didn't you say that?
Yes.
What conclusions, if any, did you draw from that fact?
My conclusion at the time was we knew that from other officers that were talking to Mr. Cayer, let's see, I'm trying to think of what I knew when. I guess the conclusions that I drew was that the bike was no longer working and someone was not going to be able to ride it in the condition that it was in.
Okay, well, the bike was believed to have been ridden to the scene by Mr. Cayer, fair to say?
Yes.
Somehow the chain came off the bike.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm asking is, in the course of your investigation, were you able to figure out, in any sense, how that chain would have come off that bike?
No. I don't even think that we looked to try to figure that out.
But the chain being off the bike would be consistent, wouldn't it be consistent with some sort of impactful event knocking into the bike? Would you agree with that?
I don't know.
You would agree that something would have had to have caused that chain to come off the bike, right?
I guess. I don't really ride a bike very often. I'm not familiar with bikes, chains, and how easily they come off or not. I don't know.
Fair enough, and no testing or anything like that was done to try to make any determinations about that in this case, right? And how far from the bike was the backpack in terms of spatial distance?
That tree line, how far the trees were apart, I would say one tree length, 15 feet. something like that, I'm
Okay.
guessing.
One minute, please. Final few questions, ma'am. You would agree that you prepared at least one report in this case, fair to say?
Yes.
And one particularly dated June 6, 2016, fair to say? Would you agree with that? June 8th, 2016.
I could have opened up a report on that date.
Okay. And you, in your report, you cataloged the following items of evidence that were seized from the outside scenes at the Riverdale address, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And I'd like to just go through them quickly and you tell me whether you agree that you seized these items, okay?
Okay.
Items 4 through 11, swabs collected from a blood trail leading from the garage to the brush line at the edge of the property.
Yes.
Item 12, a handset for a VTech cordless telephone.
Yes.
And that would have been collected because it had blood on it, right?
Well, I believe it had blood on it, but it was also outside in the middle of this wood line. It was just in an odd spot for a phone to be.
Okay. Item 13, long metal knife with silver blade with blood on it, correct?
Yes.
Item 14, a swab from blood located on the front porch at 1368 Riverdale.
Yes.
And then items 15 through 23, a variety of personal items found on Mr. Cayer.
Yes.
Items 24 through 25 were 2 additional suspected personal items of Cayer's, including a lighter and a Subaru key. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that Subaru key actually had a thumb drive attached to the keychain, didn't it?
Yes.
That's the drive that was recently examined, wasn't it?
Yes.
With the videos of Cayer on it.
Yes.
And then item 26, a swab from blood located in the woods.
Yes.
Final 2 items, a brown-colored Adidas backpack located in the tree line. We've talked about that.
Yes.
And then item 28 was the Schwinn Suburban mountain bike, correct?
Yes.
And the bike had, it's the next paragraph. The bike itself had some blood evidence on it?
It did.
And those swabs were taken, correct?
Yes.
And was it determined whose blood that belonged to?
I don't believe those were tested by the crime lab.
It would be fair to say that of the items I just mentioned, some were tested and some weren't, right?
That's correct.
That's all. Thank you.
Any redirect? All right. Thank you, Special Agent Shellhorn. You may step down. Place your shield in the box behind you marked used face shield, please. And is she released from her subpoena?
Subject to
All right. So you'll stay in touch with her. All right, thank you. Next witness? You could just give us one moment, Deputy Neerett. Thank you. You can approach the witness stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Deputy Nicholas R. Nerat, Nerat.
Thank you. You may be seated. And if you would like to swap out your face mask for the face shield that's next to you on the counter. Thank you. Now, it's sometimes difficult to get the voice projecting out of that face shield, so if you'd keep an eye on where that microphone is and maybe adjust it to bring it a little bit closer to you. Thank you.
I'm a deputy with the Brown County Sheriff's Office, Green Bay, Wisconsin. Approximately 10 years. My current capacity is a patrolman.
Mr. Lassay, could you turn your mic on? Thank you.
There we go. And do you have law enforcement experience prior to that?
I have just under a year of prior law enforcement with Menominee County, Michigan, in Menominee, Michigan.
Were you working in your capacity as a patrol officer with the Brown County Sheriff's Office on June 7th of 2016?
Yes, I was.
And did you respond to the scene of an event that occurred on Riverdale Drive?
Yes, I did.
What was your role in the response to that scene?
I was actually leaving the jail when the call came out. My response to the scene was to make contact with Sergeant Lau. Upon arriving at the scene, I was given a perimeter position on the south side of Riverdale with Deputy Thor.
Is it fair to say you were not one of the first officers to arrive on scene?
Correct.
When you arrived, were there a lot of other law enforcement present?
Correct.
Okay. And where did you set up perimeter?
I was on the south side of Riverdale, almost directly across the driveway of the residence in question. There were some outbuildings on the other side of the road that we were advised to hold on until we could get more officers to clear them out because the suspect hadn't been apprehended yet.
And what happened after you did that?
Deputy Thor and I were across the road for approximately 3 minutes waiting for other officers when we heard some yelling and screaming from the north side of the residence, at which time we ran back towards Sergeant Lau, who was near the driveway of the residence in Riverdale, and then we heard over the radio that a subject had been taken into custody, and at that time they were requesting medical assistance for that subject, and Deputy Lau advised me to follow the ambulance and to whatever hospital the subject was going to.
Were you ultimately able to identify the subject?
Yeah, he was later identified as Jacob Cayer.
I'm going to ask you to, if you recognize him, but before you do so, I'm going to ask that everybody at council table remove their masks so I can confirm.
And the first row, please.
The first row. The subject later identified as Jacob Cayer. Do you see him in court here today?
Yeah, he's right there in the gray shirt next to the subject with the blue suit.
That's the record to reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
The record will still reflect, and then everyone can put their mask back on. Thank you.
Deputy Nerat, you indicated you followed the ambulance to the hospital. Which hospital did you go to?
Aurora Bay Care.
When you arrived at Aurora Bay Care, what happened then?
At that time, I activated my iPhone camera, which we use for recording, to record the subject.
Why did you do that?
For any utterances or any evidentiary purposes that would be used later on, and the fact that it was most likely we were going to be taking evidence, and I wanted to try to get that evidence while it was on his person.
Were you involved in any sort of interrogation or questioning of Mr. Cayer?
No, sir.
So when you were recording him, were you asking him questions?
No, sir.
what was the nature of whatever it was that you recorded?
What was the nature of it?
Correct, yeah. Can you describe the recording from when you initially started?
When I initially started, he was removed from the ambulance. He was making some utterances. He was talking gibberish, unpronounced stuff. Throughout the recordings, I was in and out of the room in which he was receiving treatment. So I wasn't in there all the time. The camera was going back and forth between myself, Deputy Miller, and just being set on the table while it was recording. Some of the utterances he stated was, "I just killed my son." He made reference to whose car did I steal. He asked if he did anything stupid. He told me to just shoot him. He said if I did something stupid, just shoot me. Those were a few of the references that he made. He also stated at one point, "You know who the fuck I am." And like I said, in addition to gibberish and just talking about things that had nothing to do with what was going on.
Did you form an opinion or have an impression about the nature of his conversation or utterances in the hospital?
I just thought with the way the conversations were going between him and the nurses and stuff, I thought things were a little forced. I thought at one point he was...
I'm going to object to his opinion about what Mr. Cayer was saying, Your Honor. He testified to what was said.
So you indicated, I guess I'll withdraw that question as it relates to it. You indicated that he made a number of statements that you described as gibberish, and you described specifically some of the statements that he made. Did you also observe him interacting with the nursing staff?
Yes, at times.
And were some of his interactions with the nursing staff similar in nature, gibberish and exclamations, things of that nature?
I'm going to object on leading grounds.
Can you
Do you
describe?
want to rephrase the question?
Sure. Can you describe the nature of his conversations with the nursing staff?
Some of his answers to the nursing staff were couldn't be determined what they were being said, gibberish in terms, but then some of his conversations were just fine. He was responding. He was aware of what was going on, and at one point in one of the videos, he's even having a laughing conversation with the nursing staff.
Was Mr. Cayer aware that you were recording him?
I'm unsure.
Does he make any... you have an opportunity to observe those videos?
Yes. I know at some points he did look into the camera, so I'm assuming he was aware we were video recording, but I can't determine that.
Does he in fact make any comments about the recording?
At one point he made a comment of, was I recording certain aspects of our the transport to the hospital? Did you record or something along the lines of, did you get that when I was in the ambulance or coming out of the ambulance?
In addition to documenting things that Mr. Cayer is saying, what other things are you attempting to document with the recordings?
Injuries, specifically, I noticed some injuries on his hands, and there also appeared to be injuries where the dog had bit Mr. Cayer. So I documented both with the video and also still photographs of the injuries, which are also attached to my report.
Did you know anything specific about Mr. Cayer's hands?
They were extremely bloody, both dried blood and blood coming from fresh wounds on his hands, lacerations. There also appeared to be some rubbing marks where it had rubbed the skin off. And like I said, lacerations that were still fresh.
At some point in time, I think you assisted with the evidence disposal of Mr. Cayer's clothing. Is that correct?
Yes, we secured the evidence. Are you talking at the hospital?
Well, whatever you did to assist in that.
When we arrived at the hospital and stuff, kind of the standard operating procedure in incidents where they're trying to determine wounds, due to the fact that Mr. Cayer was covered in a large amount of blood, the nursing staff was obviously concerned that that blood was coming from him. So in a situation like that, a lot of times the clothing is removed or cut off, which is another reason I was recording, because I wanted to get that the clothing on his person. And then that clothing was eventually removed or cut off. We helped secure that in bags. And then that evidence was later taken to the Brown County Sheriff's Office. I assisted Deputy Miller with logging that evidence as well, in addition to some others, including but not limited to getting that clothing into the drying chamber, which is what we do when we have clothing that's saturated in water, blood, any sort of substance. It dries it out in a safe, secure way, and that's also secured. So I helped with that process as well.
When you were drying out the clothes in the drying chamber, did you have an opportunity to make any specific observations about the clothing?
I mean, other than the fact that it was torn and cut from emergency staff, but I just remember noticing that it was extremely saturated with blood, pretty much every article.
No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination, Mr. Cotton.
Thank you, Judge. You used your department-issued iPhone to record Mr. Cayer at the hospital, is that correct?
To a certain point, that was the iPhone in the squads. We're not issued department squad phones. They're kind of issued to a squad.
So a more accurate way to say it would be use the squad iPhone.
Correct. Yes, sir.
You didn't use your personal phone to do any recording, right?
No.
And I just want to understand the various things you filmed. You were not in the ambulance with Mr. Cayer, were you?
No, I was not.
Were you present at, was it St. Vincent's Hospital? What hospital?
Aurora Baycare.
Aurora. Correct. Were you present at Aurora when he was brought in by ambulance?
I arrived upon the ambulance arriving, and I began recording. So I got on my squad car, walked over to the rear of the ambulance, and began recording as soon as he was being exited, removed from the ambulance.
You've had a chance to go back and rewatch those videos, right?
Correct.
Okay. So one video, for example, where he's on a stretcher being brought out of the ambulance, you were the one filming that?
Yes, I believe so.
And then as he goes down a corridor into the treatment room, you're the one filming that?
I believe so, yes.
You didn't see any other officers filming at that time, did you?
No.
Okay. And you were asked whether Mr. Cayer knew he was being filmed, and I think at first you said you weren't sure. Is that still your testimony?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because you didn't tell him, I'm filming you, right?
No, I did not tell him.
Okay. So the reason you can't be sure is because you didn't announce it to him, right?
Well, the reason I can't be sure is I don't know if he saw me, but I didn't tell him.
Right.
So, yes.
It's possible he saw a phone up somewhere and drew an inference, but you didn't tell him that you were doing that.
No, I did not tell him.
Okay. Is there any reason, I don't know if it's a big deal, but is there any reason not to tell him, or?
I wasn't talking to him at all. I advised myself and Deputy Miller. I just said, no questions. We're going to wait until the detectives get here and they can handle any sort of interrogation or questioning.
Okay. So the statements he's making are not the product of a police interrogation.
Correct.
Meaning you weren't asking any questions to elicit any responses.
Correct.
Nurses might ask questions, but not law enforcement.
Correct.
So when you testified before about what you roughly classified as gibberish statements, those are unsolicited statements made by Cayer, not statements that you provoked him to say.
Correct.
Okay. So I think and you have a report that you prepared, a 4-page report, correct?
Correct.
And in your report, you actually identify some of the statements, some of the gibberish statements that were made, right?
Well, can I just clarify? I think statements and gibberish just means that I'm not understanding what the words he's saying are.
Okay, I want to clarify that. That's a good point to clarify. Some things that were coming out of his mouth were not even words you could understand.
Correct. That's what I mean when I say gibberish.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. Is that I'm not able to understand what he's saying.
Okay, so gibberish statements, couldn't understand anything, but then there were also some statements that you could understand that you did write down.
Some of them that caught my attention.
Whose car did I steal?
Correct.
Was one that you had mentioned, right?
Correct.
And you just thought that was worth noting in the report because there had been no car theft in this case, right?
Correct.
And I just killed my son. That you don't know whether he did or didn't kill a son, but it would be certainly important to document that, right?
100%. Yes, correct.
Any admission of killing anything would be important, right?
Correct.
Give me back my son, give me back my son. Same sort of follows the same thing, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you know in your report, we can watch the full videos if we want to watch the full videos to see the snippets of what was said, right?
Yes.
And in fact, it's multiple video recordings, isn't it?
Yes. So the way it was explained to me by our tech lieutenant and our tech people is at the time, 4 years ago, the iPhone, the way it recorded and the way the data was able to be downloaded onto a disk is not how it is now, where you can download one simultaneous clip and put it on a big enough DVD. So for some reason these clips were, they cut on and off, so there's multiple. I think there was like 10 or 12 clips, I believe. I'd have to review them, but and they're not in correct order, chronological. It's kind of a mess the way that they were able to be downloaded, but that's just unfortunately the technology we were at the time with downloading them.
What I'm wondering though is, in terms of what you did you film continuous filming, or were you stopping and starting as you went along?
I was continuously, not me personally, but the camera was continuously going, and I believe at one point the camera had shut off, either because it had gotten to the max data, or there was a battery issue or something. The camera had shut off at one point when I left the room, and when I came back in, it was reactivated.
Okay, had you actually set up your? I'm holding up my iPhone, for example, right now. Had you set your iPhone up actually somewhere else in the room to do the recording? Is that what you had done?
At a time, there was, like I said, there was times where it was pretty chaotic in the emergency room. So I had the iPhone in my hand, sometimes holding it. Deputy Miller, I believe, had it in his hand at some points, holding it, and at some points, I believe there was a short amount of time where the iPhone was just perched on one of the trays that was there, and it was just filming without being manned.
Were you present at the scene when Mr. Cayer was taken into custody?
Was I present by him, or was I at?
You were at the scene, fair
I was
say?
in the area, yes.
You didn't see his apprehension, though, right?
No, I did not.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions you'd like to ask, Mr. Lasay? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You may step down. If you place your shield in the box behind you marked Use Shield. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for today, Your Honor.
That's your last witness for today?
Yes.
All right, so a little bit early, perhaps, maybe not as early as I thought, but ladies and gentlemen, we're going to conclude for today. I'd like to remind you once again, I'm sorry, I'm going to remind you this every single time we take a break or we end for the day. You're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone in your household or anyone else at all, or do any research on your own. If you could return back tomorrow, we'd like to begin right at 8:30. So if you give yourself a few minutes to get through the screening and report to the hallway again like you did this morning, we'll start right at 8:30 tomorrow morning. All right, please stand for the jury.
That would be great. Yeah, put your notebooks on the seat. No, she would like to leave.
Oh, okay, okay.
Thank you.
Please be seated. All right, so why don't we make a quick record of a couple of sidebars. We had a
Sorry, I didn't move this in, Judge, but we should just.
Thank you. The first sidebar was about some question being posed to Special Agent Shellhorn about the cell phone hitting on the Wi-Fi at Walmart at about 7:50 p.m. We discussed whether there was a need for expert testimony on a ping of the phone, and then some discussion about really this was just about the Cellbrite report, and ultimately then the defense decided to withdraw the objection. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Do you want to bring her in? We're going to take up the one issue with the juror, and then I'll come back to the second sidebar. I asked the bailiff to identify which juror raised the question that we talked about. Is that her? You should sit in your normal seat, though. I'm sorry. Thank you. So I understand that you reported to the bailiff that you worked as a social worker and may have had some contact with somebody in this trial.
Yeah, I'm a hospice social worker, and so when I heard the one witness, who was the friend of Heesun, say that her husband had died from cancer, it just sparked my, because I work with people who have cancer.
I'm going to ask you to stop there a minute. Is that microphone on? Okay.
And then when I saw the videos, I recognized the inside of the house.
Okay, so do you have any recollection of ever working with anybody in this case?
I don't remember anything specifically.
Is there anything about the fact that you may have been involved as a social worker? Would it have been specifically with Sunny that you're referring to?
Her husband was the one that had cancer, and so I did a meeting with Sunny and her husband, I believe.
Okay. And you would have only been to the house one time, you believe?
Yeah, I think it was only one time.
Okay, and do you have any specific recollection of any interaction with either of these people?
No.
And is there anything about that interaction that you may have had at that residence or with Miss Teague or her husband that would cause you in any way to believe that you could not be fair and impartial in this case?
No.
Any additional questions you'd like to ask, Mr. Lassay?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Cotton?
I just want to put on the record that we conferred as a team, and Mr. Cayer has no objection to her remaining on the jury, so I don't have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you. And we just thank you so much for telling us about that so we could flush this issue out. Thank you. You're excused. All right, and then the other issue I wanted to raise about the second sidebar that we had was some questioning about when Special Agent Shellhorn was on the stand about reviewing some reports and some evidence and downloads and whether any prior threats were made. And the state said that they, when we were at our sidebar, that other acts and motions weren't filed but could have been, and didn't want to, or at least reminded the defense that that might open the door. And the defense decided then to withdraw the question because they did not want to open the door to any of that other acts evidence. Is that correct?
Yes.
Anything else you want to put on the record in that regard?
No.
Anything else you wanted to add to that, Mr. Lassay?
No, I think that's accurate, Your Honor. That's just my concern, right? And it actually came up with another witness, too, where that same sort of line of questioning was asked, and I just wanted to ensure that, to the extent that that topic is addressed, I think the concern is that it could potentially open the door because the state does have witnesses who I think would provide information that there wasn't threatening behavior.
Anything else that you want to make a record of before we get to the issue that we've been holding over since this morning?
No.
No.
Attorney
Okay.
Ankoff will address the other acts issue.
All right, let's do that then. Who wants to be heard on that first?
I'm happy to be heard on that, Your Honor. First of all, I think from the state's perspective, it's not other acts evidence. I mean, we're talking specifically about information that Mr. Cayer provided to law enforcement and that Mr. Cayer provided to another witness. The allegation is, or the suggestion is, that Mr. Cayer believes Sabrina advanced an allegation of sexual assault against him. We are not intending to suggest that Mr. Cayer actually committed a sexual assault. We don't intend to get into any facts related to an actual assault. What we do believe is significant is that Mr. Cayer believes she made the allegation, and that forms a motive. It's a clearly stated motive in his statement to law enforcement, in the conversation that he's having with Sergeant Holzbach, and then it's also information that was provided to another witness where Mr. Cayer talks about the fact that Sabrina has accused him of this. In both instances, he completely denies that any assault occurred. And the state intends to offer nothing to suggest that it did occur. In fact, we're perfectly willing to stand by the position that Mr. Cayer offered, which is that it was a false allegation. Right? We're not going to try to do anything to dissuade anyone of that notion. However, this information, this motive information that Mr. Cayer offered to two separate witnesses is significant. It is, in my view, not other acts evidence, but is in fact panorama evidence. If you look at the Jensen case, when you have a situation where the motive evidence is inextricably intertwined with the facts of this particular case, the fact finder, the court, should allow the whole story to come in. And that's exactly what we've got here, is that we've got Mr. Cayer saying, here's why I did this. I'm upset at Sabrina. She said that I sexually assaulted her, and I didn't. And I think, in fact, one of his specific responses to law enforcement has been like, yeah, I killed her, but man, look what she did to me. Anybody would be mad under those circumstances, right? So it's a very clear motive explanation, and it is part of the panorama or the overall picture of this case that Mr. Cayer believes Sabrina made an allegation against him, and that formed the basis for his actions here. So I believe that the court should, in fact, find that it is not other acts evidence, but that it is panorama evidence that's admissible to explain his actions in this instance.
Mr. Cotton?
Your Honor, I'm going to handle this.
Okay. Mr. Eichhoff?
Your Honor, first, we have to make sure we understand that just because the state says that this is something that Mr. Cayer has said, doesn't mean that it automatically comes in. While a statement against a party opponent does defeat a hearsay objection, it still has to have some other type of parameters that are based on the rules of evidence. Here, this is not panoramic evidence. If I had the opportunity to brief why it isn't panoramic evidence, I think it would be very clear. But I hope that that's not a path that we have to go down. I mean, this is clearly other acts. It's a discussion of an other act, specifically a sexual assault. It doesn't matter if Jacob says it. It doesn't matter if someone else says it. This is a other act.
But doesn't the case law indicate that if the state is not trying to prove that other act, then the statute doesn't apply?
Judge, I'm not familiar with that, with the experience that I have.
I think there's an unpublished decision which we have to consider whether or not we can use that with any precedential value, but the reality of it is the analysis this court has to undertake is whether or not this is evidence of other acts, whether it's evidence of another crime. And if the state's not trying to prove that, that's where I need you to explain to me how then it's other acts evidence.
Judge, I think first we need to look at the fact it's untimely. The fact that if the state is allowed to introduce this, we are going to have to find witnesses to essentially dispute this. Even though
to dispute that he said that, or to dispute that a sexual assault did not occur?
Dispute the fact that a sexual assault didn't occur, or to discredit the fact Sabrina for having made these statements.
But the state is not trying to prove the sexual assault occurred, so why would you need to disprove it?
Sorry, Your Honor. Go on, Your Honor.
So
please.
if the state is not trying to prove that the sexual assault occurred, why would you need to disprove it?
Your Honor, the fact that this is going to be able to come in, it is going to be prejudicial to Mr. Cayer. The jury is going to say there is a claim of sexual assault, and so we have to somehow address it. Just because it comes up in passing and the state may not be introducing some types of evidence other than Mr. Cayer's statement doesn't mean that we can ignore it as the defense. It's extremely prejudicial, and so the fact that we don't have the ability to come across to put together witnesses to dispute this, at the same time too that we have to look at the relevance. How is this going to prove whether or not Mr. Cayer is responsible for these allegations? And even if the court can determine that it's relevant, it's extremely prejudicial, much more prejudicial than probative. But when we go back just to the basics of Sullivan, the greater the similarity, complexity, and distinctiveness of the events, the stronger the case for admission of the other act's evidence. These are two completely different types of allegations. They're not similar. And then finally, Your Honor, we talk about the problems that this is going to create. I think we're all very excited about the pace of that this trial is proceeding. This is going to create a trial within a trial. It's going to lengthen a case that I believe that I'm impressed with how quickly we are getting through. And finally, Judge, we're going to confuse the issues with the jury, and it goes to the juror's sense of sympathy. And so it is going to create some problems there as well. And at the end of the day, are we convicting Mr. Cayer if it comes back guilty based on the evidence here, or the sympathy of the jurors based on this allegation, especially with the way society has changed their response to allegations of sexual assault? I just think this opens a whole slew of problems. And Judge, at the end of the day, I want this to be resolved today and not have to come back. And I just think that this is a very slippery slope that could put us in a situation where this is going to have to be tried again. And I don't think there's anyone in this room that's going to want to put us in that situation that could even risk that.
Can I briefly address the court?
Sure.
The reason why I'd like to address the court as well, Mr. Lassay, I'm not going to reiterate what he's already mentioned, but I would want the court to know this because we each have our witnesses. For example, we split up. I'm going to be doing the witness tomorrow, Zachary Holschbach, who's the primary person interviewing Jacob Cayer. And I want the court to understand a little bit about it, because you don't know all the evidence. Say you're hearing it as the judge here, and you're hearing it through the trial. I want you to know some of these things that Mr. Cayer said so you can make an appropriate analysis. And when the interview goes on and on with Mr. Cayer, at one point, he talks about Sabrina Teague. And he asks him, the detective, Holschbach asks him, how you know Sabrina Teague? And he mentions, I never mention her because I don't care to talk about her. She's a piece of shit. That's his words. She tried to blackmail my family. She said I hit her and raped her. Again, she said I hit her and raped her. She said it was an attempt, but it never happened. Teague is stupid and has nobody. She's my ex. She's telling everyone in public these lies at Perkins and Walmart. We've heard some testimony about an incident at Walmart where he's angry. She's being a dick and needs to shut the fuck up. Now, as the interview goes on, he talks about Mr. Cayer that night while he's angry. And Holschbach asked Mr. Cayer, why are you so angry? He said, because of women treating me like shit. Those are his words. And later in the interview, when specifically Sergeant Holschbach is asking, at this point in the interview, Mr. Cayer is divulging some things, and he says, Mr. Cayer, his facial expression changes, and he says, Mr. Cayer said, I stabbed her. And Holschbach says, where? And Mr. Cayer says, to the torso and neck. He's talking about Sabrina. He says, what hand did you use? I used my right hand. He remembers a lot of blood. And then Mr. Cayer said, when he's talking in the context of stabbing Sabrina, he said, and rape would make anybody mad. Almost, again, indicating in his own words, in his own mind, why he did this. Rape would make anybody mad. Again, referencing the allegations made in his mind that Sabrina had alleged he did something to her.
So that, and Judge, this is not something new that we just discovered. This is in the videos and audio that all of us have had, the state and the defense, for a long time. Now, we've never thought it was other act evidence. And the defense has been really good to work with, and they do a good job from their end. We never thought it was other act evidence from the beginning. I believe now the defense thinks it is. We still stand by our position it is not. And if we have to go forward and argue it's other acts, we're willing to do that as well under the Sullivan analysis. But I want the court to know that, to put things in context. So that's what I want the court to know.
And the reason that you think that this is so relevant is because you believe it goes to motive.
Yes.
So then I have a question for you, Mr. Eichhoff. The statute 904.04 sub 2 specifically says, sub A, except as provided in paragraph B2, evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts is not admissible to prove the character of a person in order to show that the person acted in conformity therewith. This subsection does not exclude the evidence when offered for other purposes, such as proof of motive, and then it goes on. So I'd like you to respond to that.
Your Honor, I agree that it is an acceptable purpose for that specific element of the Sullivan analysis. That is question number one. But we have three other questions. First of all, is it similar? I mean, these are two completely dissimilar. I don't know how they get much more dissimilar. So that's the issue. Then we have to talk about all the other issue. Does it the prejudicial value outweigh the probative value? And given the Sullivan analysis, I will concede that this goes to the first element. But in regards to, that's not the only question. Then we have to look at the other two questions in regards to the Sullivan analysis. And so, while the states, if they claim it goes to motive, if that's what they're trying to prove, I would concede that. But 2 and 3, relevance and probative value, completely. When you apply those, this is other acts, and it should not be permitted.
It's really hard to do another acts analysis because we don't think it is another act. It's just what Mr. Cayer is telling the police. Why I'm mad at her. Why I killed her. Talked about why I stabbed her.
I honestly, Your Honor, I cannot imagine a situation in which a defendant's stated, admitted motive for committing a homicide is not inextricably intertwined with the evidence in this case. It is his own admission as to why he committed this offense. And it's so inextricably intertwined. It is panorama. It is part of the evidence in this case. It's not another bad act. And we absolutely will not be getting into a trial within a trial because no one on the state's side is going to make any attempt to prove that there was a sexual assault. We don't care whether there was a sexual assault or not at this point. Okay, if there was, that's horrible. It's terrible that Sabrina would have had to live through this. If it wasn't, if it was a false allegation, that's equally horrible. The problem is it's totally irrelevant to this case. So we won't have a trial within a trial because no one cares whether it actually happened. It's what Mr. Cayer perceived. There's a lot of things in the course of that interview that Mr. Cayer perceives that are not reality. Okay, and it's irrelevant whether it actually happened. The only relevance is that he perceived it and that he stated it clearly as his motive. It is absolutely inextricably intertwined with the facts of this case, and that's frankly why we didn't raise it. I mean, we did. We had an hours-long motion hearing on this statement years ago, and it wasn't raised because we never really perceived it to be other acts evidence. As we got here before, and I raised it because I wanted to make sure we addressed it and we didn't have that issue with Holzbach on the stand. I don't believe it's other acts, and that's why it wasn't raised as other acts. I still don't believe it's other acts, but I wanted to bring it to the court's attention so that we could discuss it before he testifies.
Your Honor, just a brief follow-up. The state keeps on talking about panoramic evidence, and like I shared with the court, I recently briefed this. The example that I walked away in State v. Dukes, and that's 736 Northwest 2nd. In Dukes, he's charged with keeping a drug house, and the defense was arguing that a evidence of a drug purchase by one of the witnesses was other acts. And the argument was that it was necessary to prove that he was keeping the drug house, and so that was panoramic evidence. This is not an element. They don't need to prove motive. So panoramic evidence isn't appropriate here. And so, Judge, I still stand on my argument that this is other acts. It should be denied. However, Your Honor, if the court disagrees, I think a carefully crafted, a very a jury instruction that limits this the use of this is the only other alternative.
Well, frankly, I've been considering that as well as we're sitting here. If this evidence does come in, which I'm tending to believe it's going to, I think that the jury can easily be instructed to understand that there is not any issue about whether the sexual assault occurred, but rather that this is what Mr. Cayer believed and that it only goes to motive. So, you know, I want to take this under advisement for a minute or two, but that's how I'm tending to lean. I'm tending to lean toward, I don't see why it wouldn't come in to prove motive, particularly the statements to the detective. Now, I guess we need to talk about the other statements to a friend, and I think those might be a little more problematic. And why don't we do that before I consider this any further? I know you gave me a copy earlier of some of the statements. Did you want to be heard on that, Mr. Lassay or Mr. Johnson?
Regarding the other witness?
Yes.
Again, we're not talking about whether or not the allegation actually occurred. It's really the same analysis from the state's perspective, is that it's just demonstrating that, and in fact, in that case, it doesn't even say that an assault occurred. It says, Jacob said there are rumors going on that are catching up to his personal life. There are rumors about him raping Sabrina, and it never happened. He was very upset about the rumors. He told me this rumor was from when he was dating her 4 years ago, and he was upset about the rumors. I told him to let it go. I could tell he was upset about the rumors with Sabrina as he doesn't stop talking, and he's all worked up. And when he doesn't stop talking about something, he is extremely upset. So it's really just the perception from that witness based on the statement of the defendant. And again, there's no indication that there was a sexual assault. It's an indication that there is a rumor of a sexual assault, which he categorically denies, and there is no information to the contrary. And the state does not intend to elicit any information to the contrary. The purpose of admitting that evidence is not to demonstrate that he committed the assault. It's to demonstrate that he's mad at Sabrina. And he gets very upset when he talks about her. And that's a week before the homicide.
Judge, I think that Mr. Cayer's statement to law enforcement and a conversation with a friend is completely different. I think that I think they need to be analyzed completely separate. The state explicitly said we're not trying to prove this up. We're not trying to say it did or didn't happen. All we're saying is these statements were made. Why are they calling a witness asking if this statement was or was not made? That's exactly what they said they were not going to do. That's them trying to prove this up through a witness. So while I believe that neither of them should be permitted, I believe that any statements to any potential witnesses is significantly different than a statement that Mr. Cayer made around the time this incident to law enforcement.
All right. I want to take a moment to consider this, and I'll try to be back within 5 minutes.
Thank you, Judge.
Session, your silence is requested.
Please be seated. I told her I thought she was out here because she didn't respond. Can you call her just in case? I just have to wait for the court reporter. We're back on the record. So with regard to the issue of the statement made by Mr. Cayer to law enforcement, I'm going to allow the testimony that we've just been talking about to come in. First of all, I don't find that it's an other act because there is no attempt to try to prove that any type of a sexual assault occurred. and therefore I think that's significant, and therefore I don't even get to that analysis with it being an other act type of issue, and it is being offered to prove motive, which is clearly an appropriate purpose. Now, one of the things, though, I still think the court always has to look at is relevance, and I think it's relevant because of the motive, even though that's not an element of the crime. It's significant. We had a lot of discussion about that already on the record to this jury during voir dire. Additionally, one of the other things the court has to consider in whether things are admitted is whether the prejudicial value outweighs the probative value. And with regard to the statement to law enforcement, I don't find that to be the case. So I'm going to allow those statements to come in. With regard to the information to the other witness, I don't think that all of that needs to be testified to. I think that clearly that witness can testify that Mr. Cayer got very upset when talking about Sabrina, that they had this conversation only a week ago, and that there were rumors, but I think indicating specifically that it was a rumor about rape, I think that should just be cleansed from the testimony and he not testify to what the rumors were about. And I think that eliminates the concerns that the defense has in that regard, and I think that there would be some risk of the value of that testimony carrying too much prejudicial value and not enough probative value. With regard to the testimony from the law enforcement officer, I think if there's a need, certainly a jury instruction could be crafted to deal with that. At this particular moment, I'm not overly concerned about that, but I don't have any issue with coming up with a jury instruction just to indicate that this is being offered for motive and that there's no issue with regard to, that the jury should not consider whether a sexual assault actually occurred. I think that addresses a lot of the concerns of the defense because we are not going to have a trial within a trial. But I'm also not going to exclude or include evidence merely because I'm worried about how fast or slow this trial is going. That is not the issue before this court. The issue before this court is how to have a fair, appropriate trial for both sides. And if that means the trial goes longer or shorter, so be it. But with regard to a trial within a trial, I don't see there's any reason to put on evidence one way or the other about this sexual assault, given that the state's not going to try to prove that a sexual assault occurred. And I think that is willing to concede that that's not relevant for purposes of this hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and I think the jury can be instructed in that particular way. Anything else on that particular issue or any other issue?
Not from the defense, Your Honor.
All right, then we'll be in recess and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.